Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Became a Mind Reader? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya's discovery of his quirk, ironically, was brought about by its hiding. Though the issue came to a head around 3 weeks into spring, the problems really started after the first of the children in his class's quirks had manifested while he himself had nothing. Most parents give 3 weeks after their child's 4th birthday for their powers to show before taking them to their local quirk specialist to make sure nothing was wrong, but with their own son being a summer child, the Midoriyas allowed more leeway on their end. Izuku, on the other hand, was eager to see what sort of powers he'd develop and spent every waking moment trying to see what would appear, from trying to move spoons from far away to blowing on his food in hopes of flames spurting forth. "I'm sure you'll get your quirk soon, Izuku." His mother smiled encouragingly as she watched him make another failed attempt to move the couch, yet another test for potential object attraction. "Just give yourself some time. Now come on, it's almost time for lunch." Izuku pouted, upset that his attempts bore no success and that he was forced to stop, but obeyed his mother nonetheless. The months passed, slowly but surely, as still no quirk appeared. But still, the Midoriya family all waited despite their collective waning patience. Most of those in his age group were still waiting on their own quirks too, so they figured it to simply just being that their son needed more time is all. "So, kiddo," his father grinned from the computer screen, "whose quirk do you want more, me or mommy's?" Izuku, sitting comfortable in his mother's lap, scrunched up his face in concentration as he tried to think over his father's question as best as his young mind could manage. On the one hand, fire breath was rather amazing and a very hero-like quirk, and what child wouldn't love to have the ability to melt down things in a single breath, though his father's version was more akin to a small lighter. On the other hand, his mother's object attraction was great for helping people by grabbing things, and it'd make cleaning up his toys much easier. He frowned, squirming in his mother's lap until he finally brightened up, all might. Both parents blinked in surprise, staring at their smiling son, who looked as though he had given the most amazing answer ever. A few more quiet moments passed before the two burst out into good-natured laughter. They knew their child had become obsessed with the #1 hero as of late, but not to such an adorable extent. "Well geez, can't compete with that, can I?" The man chuckled while his wife poorly suppressed her own giggles and his sons stared at their mirth in confusion. "Well, I'm sure whatever quirk it is, it'll be amazing." The waiting nearly rounded to a year before they finally allowed their anxieties to be acknowledged. The excuse of, "he's just a few months late on his quirk," can only go so far for so long before even you stop believing it yourself, especially when every child in his age group had already manifested their own at that point. So they made arrangement for a trip to the free quirk clinic sometime later the week after with Dr. Arita Tsubasa of Mutsafa General. Hisashi had assured his nervous wife and child that Izuku's quirk was just taking its time to appear and the good doctor would say the exact same thing. Izuku was fine and having Dr. Tsubasa look him over would just end with him telling them exactly what they already knew. It was in the middle of his quirk examination that little Izuku's eyes had begun to hurt. It had started out as just making them feel itchy and uncomfortable, and he hadn't said much about it. When they were halfway near the end though, the pain had become excruciating enough to drive him to tears and force Dr. Tsubasa to stop just to figure out what was wrong. Several nurses were even called in to help make the child settle down so he could examine his eyes, and his mother came close to breaking down the room doors twice when his screaming reached the halls after being rushed out the room. Izuku wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it was at some point that the itching had thankfully stopped. However, when the doctor pulled away and allowed him to sit up, he had seen something. It was these tiny little lights, flickering over the man's bald head. At first, he thought it was just leftover glare from the flashlight used on him, but a quick rub and a few blinks disproved that. They were difficult to see and trying too hard to focus on them made his eyes hurt even worse than before, but every time he looked away, they would twinkle in the corner of his eye and draw him back. It almost looked like something, but he couldn't tell what exactly it was. The man turned back towards him. "Are your eyes still hurting?" Izuku, being caught staring, flushed. The lights. The doctor looked up at the lights illuminating the exam room, the lights over his head flickering even faster. Oh, do you want me to dim them? No, the other ones. He tried to explain, pointing to the spot above his head. Suddenly, the lights stopped flickering and had begun to throb and shift, as if someone was readjusting a TV set. They were turning in strange little shapes he could barely make out. QK? Wow, he whispered, eyes twinkling with glee at the sight. He wasn't sure what was happening, but it was stunning to look at it for the young boy. He wondered what the letters were supposed to mean. Then he remembered where he was. The doctor stared for a few moments, and Izuku covered his mouth, wondering if he said something wrong. His teacher had often scolded him for speaking aloud without permission, and he was expected the same to happen here. Instead, however, Dr. Tsubasa knelt down towards him, face passive yet radiating immense curiosity. I see. He mused. The lights, can you describe them to me? And so Izuku, as best his limited 5-year-old vocabulary could, explained the little lights, what had happened, and what he could see now. Dr. Tsubasa said nothing during this, only making a few non-committal noises here and there until he finished, then stood. Thank you, Izuku, he said, heading for the door. I'm going to send in a nurse to stay with you to make sure you're okay before I prepare for your other tests. Is that okay? Izuku nodded and watched him leave, staring as the lights stretched and twisted, forming what he could barely make out as very large words in neat, slim print. Interesting. Tell client. But the door shut before he could read the rest. The taxi ride back home had been hauntingly silent. Neither mother or child looking each other in the eye. You should probably give up. The both of them sat there in full shock, his all-might action figure falling to the hospital floor with a deafening clatter. His mother doubled over, silent tears dripping from her long lashes as Izuku stared out blankly at the man before him. Quirkless. He was quirkless. He couldn't have a quirk, because he was quirkless. He didn't have an extra toe joint, because he was quirkless. He wouldn't be able to pull things off the shelf with the flick of his hand, or toast things with just a single breath, because he was quirkless. He was quirkless. He was never going to be. Izuku let out a whimper and rubbed his eyes. The cab driver says nothing as he turned back to the road, but the lights above him flicker into words of concern that he dares not bring up to either of them. The lights he was seeing, the same ones blinking above the driver and his silent mother's head, were something called synesthesia. He didn't fully understand what it was, but from the bits and pieces he gleaned from Dr. Tsubasa's talk with his mother, a wire in his head was crossed wrong, and now he was seeing words and lights he shouldn't. It's not a detrimental disorder, nor will it affect his life much. I do ask that you call in if he starts saying anything worrisome or out the ordinary though. When they got home, the first thing out of his mouth was to ask his mother if she could set up the computer so he could watch All Might's debut video, the one he watched so many times he could actually quote it word for word without help, and caused his mother constant worry over him going half-blind sitting so close to the screen. Both parents often joked that he most likely made up a good 2-3 RDS of the view count. No such jokes were made, as she solemnly led him to the small little room that acted as his father's study when he was home to visit, set up the video, and let it play before leaving, most likely to call his father with the news of their son's diagnosis. She had not even remembered to turn on the lights in her rush. Though in fairness, Izuku never made a move to remind her either. Can you see that? The recorder shouted, pointing at the flaming wreckage. He's already saved 100 people. It hasn't even been 10 minutes. So there Izuku sat in the dark, watching the large blonde man in red, white, and blue spandex who would someday become the national symbol of Japan's heroic system, emerge from the burning remains of a fallen plane with swathes of injured people draped over his form. That's crazy, he's actually laughing. Another witness cried as bright, booming laughter cut through the horror and smoke like a well-forged blade. It's fine. Do you know why? He bellowed with a blazing smile as hot as the fire around him, causing the despair in the crowd's eyes to wash away as the light of hope shined through, because I am here. You should probably give up. Without a quirk, could he do something so amazing? Could he save people with only just a smile? Could a boy with only the shining words he saw above people really, truly become a hero? The door to the room opened, and they both already knew what was to come next. "Mommy," Izuku shook as he turned away from the video, tears spilling from his eyes in wet globs. "See, can I be like that too? Can I still be a hero?" His mother responded with a sudden hug, the lights above her head bobbing and shifting like a dying candle as she sobbed a sorrowful apology to her son. "My fault. Hopeless. I'm sorry, Izuku." Neither understanding what the other actually meant, they sat together in the dark, with nothing but their tears and their regrets. When it came time to deliver the news, the teachers had promised that Izuku would be treated no different than the other children. Izuku didn't believe them, not with the way their words of pity shimmered when they turned to look at him. They would do their best to teach him well and explain to the other students as best they could. Unfortunately, children being who they are, acted accordingly when the announcement was made, avoiding him, or mocking him with insincere pity, or pretending not to hear when he asked if he could play. But the words above them were all the same when it came to it. "Quirkless. Worthless. Don't want." Everyone seemed to turn on him, all except his friend Katsuki, of course. Kaken had taken the news of Izuku's quirkless status as nothing really interesting in the sort. To him, it was just a confirmation of what he already knew, that Izuku was a weak, useless Deku, only now with science to back up the claim. So he let Izuku still follow him around, still let him to praise the living daylights out of him, still allowed him to play hero and villain, and ultimately acted like nothing had changed. And Izuku, despite himself, could not see fit to leave Katsuki's side. Because even if he saw him as a Deku, he at least saw him as something, and being looked down upon was a much easier bitter pill to swallow than not being looked upon at all. Izuku wasn't entirely fine with everyone else being so far ahead, but the last thing he wanted was to be left behind by the one person who noticed him long enough to let him catch up. And he was happy, for the small moment, that nothing had changed. "What the heck's wrong with you, Deku?" Katsuki hissed, letting sparks dance threateningly around his open palm. "I told you to get lost, so why don't you? I don't need a quirkless wimp like you around." But nothing ever stays the way it was, not even relationships. Izuku had no clue what had occurred. They were fine a few weeks ago, running around the park playing follow the leader, as they always did during the summer. And yet now suddenly, Katsuki wanted nothing to do with him, shoving him away for his other friends, yelling at him for calling his name, and just all around being angry at him for having dared even exist in his presence. Katsuki had gone from tolerating to outright detesting him, and Izuku could not understand why. What had he done wrong? What could have happened to make Kaken so utterly hateful towards him? "Kaken," he cried, hopeless, tears stinging the burns littering his arms, "why are you being so mean?" Blocks of lights flashed and shimmered above Katsuki's head, and Izuku squinted to try and make them out. "Won't leave. Don't understand." Katsuki followed his gaze and sneered, "What the heck are you looking at? Nerd." And Izuku, being raised an honest, forthright child, immediately told him what he saw. And Katsuki, being a self-assured child constantly told how amazing he was, now being told he was apparently scared of his seemingly quirkless former friend, immediately responded with an explosion to said former friend's face. The latter years were met with more of the same. Izuku would see what sort of words the lights would make, people would ask what he saw, and when he told them, the results were anger and pain, usually in that order. Even with the excuse of his synesthesia, a lot of children did not like being told about Izuku's magical glowing words that only he could see. It made them upset, it made them uncomfortable, and a few even cried when he told them. Eventually, he learned the best way to avoid this was to simply keep his mouth shut and his eyes down. Didn't work all the time, but it made the beatdowns unrelated to his quirkless status less frequent. His mother would watch him come in day after day, rubbing at hurts that he'd claim came from roughhousing with Katsuki, who he hadn't played or spoken with since a morrow ago, or tripping on a staircase coming home, unable to speak the words that buzzed around her head like mad fireflies. "Is hurt. I'm sorry. My poor baby." But the last thing either wanted was to address the quirkless elephant in the room, so they proceeded forward the only way the Midoriya family knew how, tenacity and denial. So Inko pretended not to notice when he deflected the conversation away from his many bumps and bruises that, to her, seemed to accumulate out of nowhere, and Izuku pretended not to notice her pretending not to notice, and both worked hard to try and get through the rest of the day with as little issue as possible. A delicate yet flimsy system, but a working one nonetheless. When he's 8, his condition changes. It's during class, and his teacher introduces daily journals to everyone, something to encourage expressing their feelings and helping with developing their writing skills. For 3 weeks the teacher would give them a subject and they would write whatever came to mind, before allowing them to continue filling in the notebooks on their own. Izuku opens his own and looks at the teacher, waiting for instructions. And then it happens. The words above her head glimmer and shoot towards him. He lets out an inaudible gasp as they lay themselves on the pages, forming longer and more elaborate sentences than they once were, line by line. Like, this is so stupid. Who the heck came with this dumb assignment anyways? Not like any of these little brats have anything interesting to write about. Why couldn't I have been assigned to the 6th graders? At least I could have been spending more time with Junsuk. Then he looked nice in those tight. He shuts the notebook with a loud snap that has everyone in the room looking towards him, staring. That I thought I saw a bug. Izuku decides not to tell his mother about what happened when he comes home. Izuku's life falls into an easy rhythm: school, home, Quirk studying, and the occasional visit to Dr. Tsubasa's ward for yearly checkups. The doctors who worked under him were all very nice, even if they were a tad strange. Lunch and recess were filled with isolation and dinners as home were filled with silence, but all in all, nothing much changes. But oh, how they both wish it did. One day, Inko Midoriya dreams that her son will make kinder friends and enter a world more accepting to him, so she could see that dazzling, hopeful smile of his once again. One day, Izuku Midoriya dreams that he'll have the chance to become a hero, so maybe he won't have to see his mother's sad, flickering words when he brings it up. Those dreams came true around his 10th year. It had been a small, silly thing. Izuku had gotten a flu shot and had a bad reaction to it, so around his annual checkup, a few extra tests were added. Usually they went to Dr. Tsubasa's ward for this, but the man had been called always last minute for something important and the other doctors' schedules were too filled up, so his mother changed their destination to a small clinic closer to downtown. Blood was drawn, lollipops were given, and then a trip home while they awaited the results. Simple. Then a call from the clinic showed it was not. We were concerned as one of the blood tests showed the presence of a quirk factor despite his file labeling him as quirkless. We attempted to contact the doctor who made the original diagnosis, but so a trip to another hospital was made, just in case. His mother says, as the words above her flicker in concern, for tests and exams and interviews and whatever else the doctors could come up with to figure out how they could have missed something so important. You know, I have a daughter who's just about your age. One of the nurses said, tightening the cord around his arm, we thought she was quirkless for a while too, until she used it on her babysitter by accident. Some quirks tend to be harder to see than others, so there's nothing wrong finding out about yours a little late. For once, people wanted to know what the glowing words said and what they meant. He was told to speak them aloud, to write them down, to point them out when he could. Every day was a different question. What number am I thinking? What letter is that? Can you understand this man's words? What font does that woman have? How many words was that? What color do they come in? Days passed in slow, painful agony and weight of news as the tests, the words, and his own confused frustration melted together in an untamed haze. What did this mean? What was happening? What was it that everyone was avoiding explaining to him? Finally, they were called in and sent to a small little office, not unlike the one Dr. Tsubasa had back at his hospital where he gave Izuku's dream its death sentence. Your son has a quirk. The both of them sat there in full shock as Izuku's notebook fluttered to the floor, barely making a sound. He couldn't remember which of them spoke first. How? It looks like he has some form of mind reading. The doctor answered, flipping through his charts. Seems to manifest visually, the glowing words he said he's been seeing, which is unusual for mental quirks. The standard tests for this type of quirk weren't used either, which might be why his previous physician ended up misdiagnosing it as synesthesia. The words above his head glinted impatiently in the bright office lights. Embarrassing mistake. Avoidable. No one knew? Still, the way your son described his symptoms should have tipped someone off that wasn't the case, or at least gotten him another Quirk exam. If that clinic hadn't run that allergy test, we would have never caught the error. His mother sat hunched over, tears silently spilling forth. She could barely suppress the astonishment from her voice. I can't believe it, all these years and I. She turned to Izuku, who was still staring at the doctor, slack-jawed and still processing events. Mournful words of apology flickered above her head, but he barely even registered them. Well, the doctor said, smiling at them both, now that we know it's there, we can get started on helping him learn how to better control it and adjusting to having it. His words shimmered with encouragement as he spoke. 6 years is a long time to lose out on practice, and it won't be easy. But if we work hard and take it step by step, we can help get him up to speed to where he needs to be. After officially registering him in the National Quirk Registry, it was like a switch was flipped. Kids suddenly acted like they wanted to be around him again, except Katsuki. There was still that undercurrent of fear in his words, now layered in anger over the news. Teachers paid more attention when he participated in class or came in with a bruise. The other adults' looks of pity washed away into faces of joy and pride. Suddenly, the glowing words of disgust shifted into words of praise, of joy, of belief. For the first time in years, people believed him when he said he wanted to be a hero. It was everything he wanted and more. Mom, Izuku asked, eyes glued to the space over his mother's head, can I become a hero now? It had been 4 weeks after that fateful visit, and Inko Midoriya had just finished cleaning her husband's study. His son seemed to have had appeared out of nowhere and startled her with that sudden question alongside that dreadful feeling of déjà vu. It happened like this last time too, didn't it? Last time. The last time he asked that question, I'm so sorry, Izuku. She shut her eyes furiously. No, this time she was going to handle it properly. This time she wasn't going to pretend there was nothing she could do. This time she wasn't giving in to her despair. This time she was going to be on side for once. So Inko, eyes glistening with pride and joy, smiled as she looked at her son and let the words she couldn't bear to voice 6 years ago form in her mind. Izuku stared, eyes hardened, as the words he dreamed of for so long shimmered into view. And that was the last time Izuku Midoriya called Inko Midoriya Mom. In the heavily trafficked intersection of downtown Mizudafu, chaos had erupted. A man with a transformation quirk had robbed a nearby liquor store and was now going on a rampage after getting cornered by the police and turning into a 10-foot creature. Several heroes had been called on scene to deal with the damage and evacuate civilians, but so far none of them could really handle the man's quirk. Just when all seemed lost, a lone figure leapt over the watching crowd, dressed in a navy blue jumpsuit and wooded mask. He slowly made his way over, causing the crowd to relax in his presence. They all recognized him as Kamui Woods, a hero who had made his debut recently and had taken Musutafa's hero scene by storm. At this point, and with the way the crowd was cheering, you'd expect him to start bowing and blowing kisses out to the watchers. However, his priority at the moment was dealing with the villain occupying the roads and blocking traffic. Good, he hasn't caused too much damage yet. If I can distract him long enough and keep his attention from the crowd, I can just bind him with my quirk and let the police handle the rest. Assault, robbery, and illegal quirk use during traffic hours, he announced, causing the giant scoundrel to turn towards him as Kamui jabbed an accusatory finger in his direction. You, sir, are the incarnation of pure evil. He drew his arm back as his opponent turned to charge at him, small branches growing out of his arm. He needed to have a big enough wind-up to be able to surround his target properly as well as avoid his branches getting caught in any loose spaces and aimed at his target only. Now if he could just remember though right. Preemptive binding lacquered chain pre-dash. However, just as he was about to finish calling his attack, an extremely large blonde woman in a purple and orange jumpsuit jumps out of nowhere and literally smashes her backside into the charging villain. Cannon! She yelled, and the man went flying, crashing into the pavement below. The watching crowd and Kamui all stared slack-jawed at the unfolding scene as the woman stood to full height, towering over everyone present as well as the surrounding buildings. Alright you got the villain and their attention. New patrolling around this area was a good idea. My grand debut splash is all set to proceed. Now, like you practiced, hair flipped, but out, and howdy, the name's lady, she winked, coyly brushing her hair away. Nice to make your dash, and stuck her rear end out for all to see, but quaintance. The arriving paparazzi and lingering witnesses clamored around with cameras and phones out to get in their money shot of the new hero, all but forgetting that their recent rising star Kamui was still there, staring at the empty space where he was about to capture his target. Deep in the crowd, a young boy with deep green hair was nose-deep in his notebook as the scene unfolded, scribbling in a light blue notebook with the words, Hero Analysis for the Future Number 13, written in neat, black ink. On the left page was standard analysis, thoughts on quirk capability, technique, assumed power level, potential weakness, everything the boy could glean from watching their battles. On the right page, however, Kamui Woods was immediately focused on accessing the damage caused by the villain and assuring he didn't accidentally cause any causalities through capture. Expected, considering he's been official for a month or so he's got plenty of experience, the boy mumbled, green eyes twinkling in thought. If he hadn't gotten so caught up in memorizing his attack name, he would have likely captured him quicker. Meanwhile, MT Lady's sole focus was stealing the spotlight and hadn't put any thought into assisting Kamui, though she made sure the villain was not only farther away from the crowd, but recalibrated her strikes so he'd be both incapacitated and unable to move. She'll probably grow out of the attention-seeking, seeing as it is her first day, but hopefully it'll happen sooner rather than later. You a hero fanboy, son? The scritch-scratch of pencil on paper stopped as the boy turned to see a large bald man smiling down on him as the police shuffled away all the looky-loos from the scene to keep them out of the way of cleanup. He flushed, embarrassed to be caught red-handed, and pressed the notebook against his face. Was I that obvious? The older man's grin widened and gave a hearty laugh. Saw you eyeing that villain fight like it was free chicken dinner, he teased, plus you were mumbling the entire time. This caused the freckled youth to blush even harder and mumbling out something about being more aware of surroundings as the man's eyes fell onto the notebook's name. Hero Analysis for the Future, eh? You looking to becoming a pro-hero, fanboy? The green-haired boy's eyes flickered upward as glowing words unseen by all drifted into view above the smiling bald man's head. Bright kid. Bit of a nerd. Would be fine hero. Izuku Midoriya smiled back and shut his notebook with a gentle clap. You could say it's something like that. Name: Midoriya, Izuku. Age: 15. Address: XXXXXX. Quirk: Mind Reader. Description: the quirk give the holder the ability to view the thoughts of other people by manifesting them as visual script. They are only visible if the holder is looking at his targets. Inside a classroom at Orudera Middle School, a teacher attempted to get his excitable class settled so he could get on with his agenda. As you are well aware, we're in the final semester, which means preparing for your high school exams. A few groans escaped from the rows. Now, no whining. This is an important next step in planning your careers after all. It's getting time to start thinking seriously about your futures. Everyone in the class reluctantly nodded in agreement as their teacher continued, mouth pulling into a small smile. Now, I was supposed to hand out these future career surveys to you all, but... With no other forewarning, the teacher threw the papers into the air as his smile bloomed into a full-blown grin, laughter ringing through the room. I already know what your plans are. You all want to be heroes. The statement was met with cheering students proudly throwing around their quirks as confirmation. Fire, water, rocks, and extended limbs launched into the air along with the discarded forms. The celebration was interrupted by a taunting snort, and a spiky blonde-haired boy sitting in the fourth row dragged his leg onto his desk as he lazily regarded his audience. Don't lump me together with these extras, sensei, he huffed, letting a few explosions light up the center of his palm. Unlike these losers, I'm actually destined for greatness. The teacher ignores the protests of his annoyed classmates and hummed approvingly at Katsuki's declaration, Oh, of course, Bakugu-san, you're planning on attending UA, aren't you? with your grades and quirk, you're a guaranteed shoo-in. UA would be lucky to have someone of your talents in their student body. The blonde snorted at the hollow praise, but made no move to dispute it. No one could. He got excellent grades, his permanent record was squeaky clean, and he aced almost every quirk assessment the school threw at him along with the mock exam. Katsuki's admittance into UA was practically written in stone as far as everyone was concerned, himself included. That's right, I'm the only person here going to UA. He announced boldly, I'll surpass All Might and become the #1 hero, no, even higher than that. You extras couldn't even dream of touching me. In the midst of Katsuki's bragging, the teacher suddenly frowned and looked down at his clipboard, flipping through a few pages. Actually, now that I think about it, he squints at the form, then turns his gaze to the far back of the room. Midoriya-san, you said you wanted to go to UA too, didn't you? The classroom went silent, and all eyes turned to the boy in question, who flustered under the sudden attention and tried hiding behind his notebook. If that's right, he answered awkwardly, not even attempting to make eye contact with the class. I've always wanted to be a hero, and UA's been my dream since forever. I know it'll be difficult, yes, especially with my quirk, but I'm absolutely determined to go. The teacher nods amicably at that. Of course, Midoriya. You're a hard worker, and some of your other teachers have complimented you on the work you've done in their own classes. UA's certainly not an impossibility if you plan on going. The boy beamed shyly at that, and few classmates nodded in enthusiasm at their teacher's compliment towards their classmate, and some even found their own goals of heroism bolstered by his claim alone. Aiming for UA was like aiming for the moon, not impossible, but you'd definitely die trying. Midoriya might get average grades and wasn't the easiest guy to pick out of the room, but they couldn't deny his intellect or his determination. If he wanted to go to UA of all places, he was going. The rest, however, stared ahead in abject terror, because they all knew exactly what was to come right after that kind of declaration. If there was a contest for fastest time to get out of a chair to threaten someone, Katsuki Bakugo would have been the contending world champ of 3 years running. 1 minute he was sitting, seething over hearing that dumb Deku was having fantasies of attending his first choice. The next he was in front of the green-haired boy, leaving scorch marks on the desktop as his quirk popped and blistered around his hands. "No way," he screeched, leaning in. "Forget dumb quirks, yours is the shittiest out of all these other bottom feeders. Do you honestly think it's even good enough that you can face off against me, let alone get into UA?" Izuku's shy smile didn't fade, but the pleasant, determined gleam in his eye turned cold right quick as he met Bakugo's burning glare. "Facing off requires an actual fight, Bakugo," he says, tone unamused. "I'm not trying to challenge you, I just plan on attending UA and trying for the heroics program, nothing more." "Bullshit." Katsuki's palms hissed loudly as he pressed harder onto the desk. "Like I said, I'm only person in this shitty school who's going to UA. No way I'm letting a shit stain like you jeopardize my perfect debut." Izuku's smile drops at that. "Last I checked, I don't remember any of the UA staff announcing they were making a one-person-per-school policy," he replied blankly, further stoking the fire of the blonde's rage. "Me applying for UA isn't going to hurt your chances that badly, you have nothing to be so scared about." Katsuki actually took the moment to let out a laugh, harsh and feral. "You really think I'm scared of you, Deku?" Izuku's eyes move upward, and the words above Katsuki's head whirl and glimmer in fearful, angry spurts. "Challenging me. Stop mocking me. Don't understand. You're not acting like you aren't scared, Kakin." He smiled pleasantly, as the blonde's upper lip curled at the sound of that overfamiliar nickname. A not scared person wouldn't think another person being interested in UA too was a problem for them. Izuku then stood, forced to look up as Katsuki still had a few feet on him. "Not unless, of course, you think it might be?" Katsuki snarled, and dug his fingers into the desk in response, explosions increasing in volume and brightness. No one could even breathe as the scent of burnt wood filled the air and waited for something to happen. The teacher suddenly spoke up. Now, that's enough of that." Both boys broke out of their staring contest long enough to give him their attention again. "We still have lessons to go through." Bakugo-sen, Midoriya-sen, if you could return to your seats please? The words above him stuttered in rage, and Katsuki leveled one last venomous look Izuku's way before heading back to his seat, kicking the other boy's desk leg in spiteful retaliation. Izuku remained standing for only a moment more before sitting back down as well, eyes returning to his notebook. As expected, once the bell rang, Katsuki was ready to make a straight line for Izuku's face with his fist for his backtalk this morning. Was bad enough for the nerd to mouth off to him, but to do so in front of witnesses, and even going as far as accusing him of feeling scared. That was beyond the pale and would not go unanswered. However, even in his anger, he was smart enough to know he had a better chance at giving Izuku a more thorough punishment with less witnesses about, so instead he stayed cloistered near the door, flanked by two of his followers, remnants of the Katsuki hype train in their class, while the rest of the school still suffered under Bakugo fever and thought rather highly of him. Being forced to spend an entire year with the explosively vulgar blonde was enough to wear out his welcome for the rest of his classmates real quick, even if they were too scared of retaliation to say so out loud, as the rest of the students all scrambled out of the way and out the door to avoid being the radius of Hurricane Bakugo's nuclear blast zone. Though a few might have a soft spot for the green-haired boy, none of them weren't crazy enough to put themselves in the way of Katsuki's wrath for their own grandmothers, let alone their sort of friend-acquainted classmate. Izuku had put away the last of his things before taking out a worn green notebook, edges curled and torn at by constant use over the years. He opened it up to scroll through the pages and then turned his eyes towards Katsuki, allowing Mind Reader to make his thoughts envelope the empty pages he stopped on. Deku, thinking he can go around challenging me. Where F does he get off thinking he has the FING right to intervene with my plans on becoming number one? What if he no, don't be ridiculous. The fucker nothing, a useless pebble in my path and nothing more. Dumbass shitty nerd's just forgotten what his goddamn place is, and looks like I'm gonna have to remind him where the F he actually stands. He sighed and closed the book, watching the words shatter into golden bits of light. Should've known. Despite himself, Izuku had suspected this was how things were going to go down even before the teacher purposely announced his plans for UA to his classmates, and he had done it on purpose, thinking of it as encouraging healthy competition between students when he knew exactly how Katsuki would take the news. Everyone knew how important being the one and only UA hopeful was for Katsuki, and that anything threatening that position was anathema in his eyes and would be immediately marked for death without hesitation. After all, Katsuki was the best of the best, the king of the mountain, the absolute and unopposed ruler of all, and because he was best, that made Izuku the worst of all the worsts, a pauper, a piece of trash that belonged on the way bottom of the ladder below everyone else, specifically Katsuki. And the last thing trash should be doing is announcing that it had plans for UA as far as he was concerned. He couldn't have his one chance at success be threatened by the likes of Izuku after all. Not that he'd even admit it, mind you. Heavens forbid Katsuki have to admit stupid little Deku was enough to make him worried about something, let alone be a threat. Deku, Katsuki growled, stomping over to his desk as the last of their classmates filtered out. We need to talk. No, we don't. Izuku countered, not even turning to look at him. You just want to pick a fight so you can better convince yourself you're not feeling threatened. Katsuki's eyes narrowed, and Izuku found himself knocked to the floor from an exploding punch as Katsuki's posse hooted and hollered in glee. There you got again, spouting weird a shit that makes no sense, the blonde snarled. I said it before and I'll say it again. There's no way I'm scared of your shitty nerd butt. And like I said, he began, doing his best to keep his tone even and face neutral as he pulled himself up. You sure as hell aren't acting like it. Katsuki shoves another explosion his way and he finds himself on his butt again. He takes a breath, don't react, it's what he wants. Keep calm and you keep control. Why do you even care that I'm going? Izuku asks, glaring coldly up at him. I thought I was just a pathetic Deku who couldn't dare match up to you? Why am I suddenly a threat? Katsuki's fists shook in fury as he glared down at Izuku's blank stare. Fuck. Challenging me again. Not a coward. You know'd well why. the blonde bristled, baring his teeth in frustration. All the great heroes, from Endeavor to Captain Celebrity, have one thing in common, one single distinct thread shared among them, that they all came from some no-name middle schools, before making their debuts as heroes. Every single one of them a literal diamonds in the rough that forced the world to see them shine. He then threw his arms out majestically, as if posturing for a phantom crowd. And that's exactly where my grand legacy lies. UA is going to be the first stepping stone in my story of how I became the #1 FING hero. It's my dream, my purpose, hell, my effing fate to surpass everyone, even All Might himself. Becoming the #1 hero has been my dream since I was effing born. He walked over and jabbed a finger the downed boy's way, red irises flashing triumphantly. And a worthless pebble like you has no place in it. Remind him. He's below you. He's worthless. Just a useless Deku. Izuku blinked and carefully pushed himself off the ground. So basically, I have to sacrifice my higher education because you want to have something to brag about to your future coworkers? Katsuki sent another explosion his way, only this time he had the sense to actually stumble out of the way. Of course a loser like you wouldn't understand. He huffed, rolling his eyes at the other boys like he had just explained the most simplest thing in the world. I've spent years preparing for this day, and the last thing I need is you effing it up. I'm the only person here who needs to go to you, understand? Flunkies 1 and 2 stepped forward, sensing it was their time to back up their illustrious leader. He's right, you know? UA only takes the best quirks, and yours is the worst of the litter. A useless wimp like you wouldn't even be allowed to go past the front gate. The first smirked, sneering boldly from the sidelines. They'd never let a loser like you in. Better just give up now and save yourself the embarrassment, the second added with a laugh. Your quirk's completely too pathetic for them anyways, Katsuki says, grinning at the tremor that shook through Izuku's shoulders. It's shit for fighting, it's barely useful, hell, you didn't even know it was a quirk until the doctors realized they f'd up your exam. You're no better than a effing quirkless person, he jabs a finger into his chest, and you say you want to become a hero? Don't make me laugh. Pick some other trashy school to f around in, you'd be better off for it. He in a breath, gritting his teeth. While one of the benefits of knowing Katsuki for so long is that he knew exactly what buttons to press to push him over, it came with the downside of Katsuki knowing what buttons to press to push Izuku right back. Keep yourself steady, don't take the bait, don't play his game. You know, there's a girl in 3B who said she wants to go to UA too, Izuku says, bunching his hands against his uniform's pant leg. And I'm pretty sure I overheard some second years talking about taking extra lessons to prepare for the exams next year. There are plenty of other kids in this school who have their eyes on UA just like the both of us. He looks Katsuki right in the eye, not even flinching at the hardened stare. And yet, I don't see you threatening them? Why is it that only I need to learn my place? Why am I the only threat to your amazing grand vision? What are you so scared is going to happen if I get in? Katsuki's arrogant grin grew wider, and a few explosions escaped from his flexed palm. Will you get the effing wax out of your ears? I told you I ain't dash. Won't back down, stop challenging me, don't understand, scary. He listed off, and Katsuki's smile dropped into a thin-pressed line. You can lie all you'd like, but you know you can't hide anything from me, Kakin. That one earned him an actual punch, no explosions. You've got a lot of nerve, acting like you're even worthy of being on the same level as me. He roared as the green-haired boy rubbed his now-bruised jaw. UA is for the elite, the best of the best. Before he could even stop him, Katsuki snatched his journal away, bending the spine in his iron grip. And last I checked, that didn't include you. Izuku's eyes widened as he leapt up to grab it, the blonde's smirk returned as he skillfully dodged the other boy's rather poor attempt at getting his item back. Don't get upset, it's what he wants. Remember, you're in control if you remain calm. But it's hard to remember, not with the way Katsuki grins and his words sparkle smugly over finally getting Izuku's eyes to grow desperate, flunkies merrily egging him on with each swipe he evades. You can only read people's minds if you use this, right? How exactly do you plan on fighting villains with a FING book? Katsuki asks mockingly, keeping the journal just out of reach. And I took it so easily from you too? All anybody needs to do is knock it out of your hands and you're practically helpless. You'd be nothing but a FNG burden on the battlefield. It's getting harder to breath, from both the running and his rising anger. He almost doesn't notice they've switched positions since the start of their little dodging game. Now Katsuki's standing with his back to the window and Izuku's right in front of the entrance. If he wanted to, he could easily blindside the other two and run out, grab a teacher or someone happening to be listening in on the commotion in the classroom. Whether or not they'd believe him, Katsuki would have to back down in the face of an authority figure, no matter how unlikely he'd think that they'd go through with reporting the event, because even if they can't allow their golden meal ticket Katsuki to be caught in any controversies, they had to at least take actual reports semi-seriously. They could get away with playing ignorant to a hallway scuffle or two, but with the school's reputation and graduation being so close, actively lying about a harassment complaint was social suicide. But they both know he won't. Don't get upset, he knows you're right. Izuku laughed, actively pushing down a stutter that threatened to come out. Better a burden than a cowardly paper tiger. Katsuki's eyes twitched, and Izuku literally had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from crying out over his journal getting battered by explosions between his tormentor's palms before unceremoniously being tossed out the window. Dumbass, like you have no right trying to be main characters. He scoffs coldly as he slams the window shut and walks past, ramming his shoulder into the freckled boy for extra indifference. So do us both a favor and stay out of my way. Izuku had to start breathing through his nose, fearing he would not be able to keep his voice steady. Don't get upset, it's what he wants. You're winning, you're actually winning, he can't make you stop and he knows it, just don't show your. I'm going to become a hero Bakugo, he wheezes through gritted teeth, hands shaking violently and eyes stinging with familiar tears he was desperately trying to keep in. You can't stop me. That actually makes Katsuki halt his exit, if briefly. You want to be a hero that badly? He asks, and Izuku can almost see the spiteful grin he was making behind him. Then take a swan dive off the roof and pray you get a better quirk in your next life. All the oxygen in the room seemed to evaporate in that moment. Katsuki hadn't meant it, even if the words over his head told him that much, they both knew he hadn't really meant it. Katsuki was, and became, a lot of things over the years since their childhood friendship had fractured, but even he wasn't enough of a BSRD to say something that like with any real, meaningful intent. He wanted to be a hero after all. He knew Izuku wouldn't actually do it. He was just trying to get a rise out of him, hurt him badly enough to get some form of victory out of this dumb spat, because Katsuki has to win, always has to have first place, even if it meant saying something like that in the heat of the moment. But still. Okay. Katsuki's head turns with eyes widened as Izuku headed for the window, and the lackeys guffawed at poor little Deku, throwing a tantrum over getting his feelings hurt. What a baby. He opened the window and the laughing stopped. Izuku looks over to see Katsuki has turned his back on him again while the other two paled and poorly tried to laugh off the scene. They obviously hadn't expected events to turn out this way, thought it was just going to be another fun day of watching their grand leader torment his favorite toy while they waited in the wings, cheering on his cruelty. Dude, come on. The first flunky, what was his name anyway? He only ever heard Katsuki call him dumbass or some other insult, and he hung out with no one else except Katsuki and his fellow bully. It was actually kind of sad when he thought about it, said nervously, obviously unnerved by how close he is to the window. His partner's words flutter in a hazy panic, concerns of repercussions if Izuku was going to take the blonde's word to heart. Seemed a tad late for concerns if he was honest. But still, what kind of quirk do you think I'll get after this regeneration? Flying? Adaptability? He asks loudly as he stuck his head out, trying to be heard over the non-existent traffic. Frankly, I'm kind of hoping for strength enhancement, seems much more useful for hero work. Or maybe I'll get a water quirk, the koi pond's right there after all. Katsuki still hadn't turned around, so Izuku pulled his head back in before turning to sit up on the windowsill, admiring the view. Their classroom was on the third floor behind the school, overlooking a small koi pond and the surrounding neighborhood. A lot of his classmates complained that the view was dreary and confining, but he thought it was pretty okay, even if his own desk was too far center to really appreciate it. The lackey shook, saying that he was bluffing. No way a chicken shit like Deku would even think of taking him seriously. He knew they were joking. Izuku smiled, "Bye, Kaken," and leaned back, letting go of the classroom door slides shut, and Izuku is coldly reminded that the window is still closed. The journal is ruined. Its spine is bent, and though its thicker cover had protected it from the water, it did nothing to save the pages from becoming waterlogged nor from warping under the heat of Katsuki's palm, which has now left 5 fingerprints on each side, 1 on the back and 4 on front. "It's a journal," the voice on the receiver says as he eagerly tears into his present, staring wide-eyed at the journal's olive green cover. "Your mother tells me you've been writing a lot more in your notebooks lately, already on your 5th one even. You can use it as a more personal book, to focus your thoughts." "That's not food, stupid fish," he grumbled, retrieving his soaked item. Part of him tells himself it isn't so bad. Some time with his mother's hairdryer, a bit of glue, and it's usable again. Nothing he can't fix. Another part is screaming vengeance, wanting to find Katsuki and smash his ruined journal into his face. He knows it will earn him a true pummeling, that all the calls of cowardice in the world won't protect him, but it would be so wonderful to have the first punch for once. But he can't, because he's just as much of a coward as Katsuki claims himself not to be. So instead he clutches it to his chest, taking deep, heavy breaths as he tries to keep the world from crumpling into his small frame, the familiar sting of tears pricking his eyeballs. "You don't care, don't let him win, you 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 don't care, if you get upset now it'll just prove him right, don't let him win, you don't care, don't let them win, you don't care." The empty streets seemed to roar violently behind him even though he was the only one there. "You don't care." With everything said and done, Izuku attempts to make his way home as quickly as he can, not wanting to spend even a moment longer on the school grounds. He decides to cut through the old bridge downtown, as it's the quickest route to the train station and then home, where he can decompress and hopefully forget about his awful encounter and the building anger itching at the back of his brain. He's so cluttered with repressed disappointment at himself and self-pity, he almost misses the sound of the manhole cover ahead of him shifting. Almost. With a quick backtrack, Izuku quickly hides behind the wall of the underpass entrance just as a goopy river of murky green sludge slinks out of the sewer drain, 2 panicked jaundiced eyeball floating on the surface alongside a set of cracked, yellowing teeth. "Sheet, that was close," the living sludge swore, the word's stiff print flashing above seemed to match his apparent unease. "Got away. Can't let him catch me." He stared as the sludge seemed to move around the underpass hurriedly, obviously trying to figure out where to go from here. Had he just escaped from somewhere? His Hero News app didn't go off though, and he hadn't heard any police sirens pass by, so maybe it was still in progress or something. But that brought up the question of what he could have possibly done that required fleeing like that? The underpass was pretty far off the beaten path too, so he probably traveled quite a ways away to get all the way here in the first place, which means whatever or whoever he was running from, he was that desperate to get away from, a feeling Izuku could unfortunately relate to, that swimming through miles of raw sewage just to escape. His quirk obviously helped matters, as it appeared to make him viscous enough to glide throughout the sewer and across the ground with ease, with enough strength to just push the manhole cover off with little issue. Now that he thought about it, he had heard some mutation quirks did come with slight strength enhancement. The words above the villain's head shifted as he vibrated with terror, slamming a fist against the ground. Dang, it was just supposed to be a simple purse snatching. How it'd get to this? Easy job. Heard no heroes. Why All Might? Not fair. That makes Izuku's eyes light up with curiosity. None of the hero forums he frequented said anything about All Might being in Mizudafu, though there were a few claims of sightings that were believed to just be view bait. Still though, the number 1 ranked hero being in the city was a major thing, and it shocked him no bystanders or media hounds were making any noise about it. Was he keeping a low profile for some reason? Is he on a special assignment or covert business? He assumed he had to be because All Might was well, All Might. You can't be All Might and enter a city like Mizudafu without alerting someone, right? The most excitement they've had is that time Maricane held a concert to open up one of their new specialty stores. This was... the slime's moving again. He makes a frustrated gurgle as he slinks around, trying to figure out a proper escape route it seems. His options are pretty limited though. The moment he leaves the underpass, someone will spot him eventually thanks to the lack of cover, and going back down into the sewers isn't really an option as there's no telling where the next manhole opens out to. It's either wait to be captured or risk getting caught leaving. Need to escape. Must hide. Can't get caught. Gotta make plan. It's at that point that the boy remembers that he really should be calling the police. Honestly, he should have done so the moment the slime came of the sewer. He shifts back to his hiding spot and pulls out his phone, quickly typing out the number for emergency services. It shouldn't take them too long to get to his location. He just had to be quiet and hold out for their arrival. It rings twice before he suddenly hears light footsteps coming from on the other end of the underpass, and a feminine voice echoes against the walls. Oh God, am I still lost? Izuku blinks. It's English, right? He's watched enough HeroTube videos of All Might's interviews from his time in the US to at least recognize it, and feels his stomach tighten as the footsteps get closer. Someone was here? Why was someone here? Almost no one comes to this place if they can help it unless they lived somewhere in the area, too out the way from any hero agencies for some people's liking. Did she get lost? Was she heading to the station like he was? He peeks out quick enough to get a glimpse of the villain's new thoughts, eyes flashing in wild panic at the slime's gaze turning predatory. Someone's coming? Perfect. Free new meat suit. The word meat suit has Izuku's stomach churning as the slime man presses himself back down into the manhole cover he had exited from just moments ago, sliding the cover back over just enough to hide his presence while also making it quick easy for him to pop back out and surprise his new guest. Izuku's chest tightens. What does he do now? Does he warn her, tell her to turn around? But then the villain will know he's here, and had been watching him, and might come after him. But that's a lot better than him attacking some stranger, and he couldn't live with himself if something happened he could have prevented. But he's not confident he can even fight the villain on his own long enough for her to get away if he did get caught, and there weren't any houses for miles, so calling for help was out of the question too. Maybe if he's fast enough, he could go around to the other side and lead her away? But his English isn't really all that good. He can say, "How are you?" introduce himself, and ask for the bathroom, but that's about it, and he's bound to freak her out just popping out of nowhere like that. Maybe he should just wait till he gets connected with the police, but by the time they get here the sound of the receiver clicks against his ear. "Hello, this is 911, what is your emergency?" The girl takes a step forward, and Izuku takes one as well. Run! But the warning comes too late, and the slime villain is upon her, enveloping the girl in its gelatinous form. Hold still, it'll only take a few minutes. The living Sludge laughs crudely as the girl rides in his grasp. Really thought I was really screwed for a minute there. Good thing this free meat suit came waltzing out of nowhere. I really owe you one, girlie, you're my hero. Logically, he should have just told the operator what was happening, followed whatever instructions he would be given, and hoped for the best. His quirk, no matter how he felt about it, would do nothing against a man twice his size and 10 times as strong. But he didn't, because even though he couldn't see her, he could see her sleek words shining bright over the slime like a beacon. Can't breathe. It hurts. Someone help me. Izuku ignores the yells of confusion from the operator and instead rushes forward, phone forgotten as he tugs off his backpack and throws it as hard as he can. The slime villain is startled for only a moment as the contents spill out, allowing the green-haired boy to swiftly grab hold on the girl's one visible flailing arm and begin tugging with all his might. The person, a blonde girl with tearful blue eyes in a pink and gray sweater, looks upon him in shock as he pulled. The slime villain, however, recovered from his sudden bludgeoning, looks over at the boy futilely trying to free his prey and lets his eyes winkle with mirth. Oh ho? Another meat suit's appeared? Well, this just gets better and better. The sludge moves towards him, crawling over his limbs, and Izuku realizes he's done the most stupidest thing he could. Instead of getting help or ensuring the police knew what was going on so they could arrive to save them, he literally ran into the villain's grasp with no plan or exit strategy, effectively sealing his and the girl's fates. He then spots his All Might pencil roll by along with his other school supplies. That's gonna be a hell of a mess to clean up, provided he lives to do so, then turns his gaze back to the villain's eyes, floating aimlessly through his syrupy form. This was a worse plan than his early one, but at least it was something. Izuku lets go of one of the girl's hands. Her eyes shrink in terror before he's squeezing the arm he's still holding, assuring her he's not leaving her, and begins reaching out, fingers brushing past the pencil. The villain luckily doesn't seem to notice, preoccupied with taunting his hostages and bragging about how hard it will be to pick which of them to ride. Was that how his quirk worked? He called them both meat suits, so that means it must require physical contact with his victims, with the implication being that he has to have access to stop that. There's no time. On his third try, the pencil is finally in reach, and Izuku looks over to the girl, who looks back in a mixture of panic, confusion, and exhaustion. She looked close to passing out actually. Sheet, that's bad. With a valiant and desperate scream, Izuku stabs downward wildly onto one on the villain's eyeballs, immediately sickened by the squelching sound of the tip piercing the iris. The villain screeched in pain as it finally released his hostages, allowing Izuku to crawl away while dragging the girl behind him. "Go now!" he screams over the slime's rattling cries. The girl looks like she's about to argue, but Izuku ignores her protests and instead shoves her ahead of him, just in time to suddenly lose his footing as his legs are swept from under him. The villain looms over him as Izuku's dragged forward, his pencil still in the stabbed orb that bleeding and mixing into the slime man's grimy viscous body. "You F brat!" He screeches, and Izuku feels the sludge surrounding him convulse wildly as the villain's words flare with his growing rage. "My hurts. Think kill you." Panic overrides his senses and he futilely kicks his feet out as the slime continues to engulf and compress him. Another squeeze forces Izuku's mouth open and slime pours down his throat and covers his nose, blocking any oxygen from reaching his burning lungs. Someone was screaming and he couldn't tell if it was him, the girl, the villain, or all three of them, but it's making his ears ring. His heart hammers and the world darkens, the villain's thoughts the only source of light. "Kill you, kill you, kill you, kill you." Before he could even begin accepting that those were the last words he'd ever hear, a familiar boisterous laugh echoed throughout the underpass, distracting the villain from his murder attempt. "Have not fear, for I am here." The last thing Izuku saw was the villain suddenly being flung away from him. When Izuku finally comes to, he immediately rolls over onto his knees to vomit out the excess sludge occupying his stomach, cheeks stinging as he tries to take desperate sputtering breaths. Oh God, it was disgusting. As you'd expect from someone who had spent God knows how long slicking around the city sewage pipes. It was going to take him forever to rid the taste out of his mouth. But at least, to his enormous relief, he can breathe again. An unknown shadow blankets over him. "Kill you." And he whirls to get away, frozen as he finds himself staring up into the face he's only had the pleasure of seeing on TV and newspaper clippings. "Good, you're awake," the large blonde man said as the boy blinked owlishly at him, seeming not to notice his rescue victim's paling face. "Had me worried for a second there." "Why, you dash," Izuku stuttered through his trauma and fanboy-fueled stupor, trying process the sight of the #1 hero of Japan towering over him, and in casual wear no less. The man laughs, tossing his head back before striking an impressive dynamic pose. "Yes, it is I, All Might," he announces boldly before handing Izuku his backpack back. Well, more like tossing, words above his head flashing just as dramatically. "Smile big," is probably still shaken. "Show him there's no problem." "I must apologize for what happened," he says apologetically. "I had been chasing that villain earlier when he ducked into the sewer system. Had I caught him sooner, you too would have avoided being placed in any danger." Despite the slight distraction of how simplistic All Might's mind font was, he expected something a bit more bolder. From Japan's #1 hero, the mention of another person immediately reminds Izuku exactly why he was almost dead, and his earlier panic resettles itself. "That girl, is she okay?" All Might stares for a moment, startled by his outburst, then laughs. "Yes, she's perfectly fine." He points down back at the bridge. I asked her to wait back while I checked on you. She's very grateful that you came in to try and help her, by the way. Even went as far as to call you her hero. As a pro, I must commend your bravery in face of such a terrifying ordeal." Izuku squirmed over the praise and felt himself flush. Even though he was still jittery from earlier and his main priority had been the girl's safety, it made him feel a little embarrassed being told by the top pro hero he had done a good job. "However," he adds, grin turning stern, "as a pro, I must also tell you what you did is very reckless. I can understand it being an emergency, but the last thing you should ever do as an untrained and unarmed civilian is directly confront a villain." "Oh," he mutters, his small bout of pride deflating just a bit. Any other time, he would have been a little miffed he was being scolded for trying to help someone, especially since they were in such an isolated area to begin with. That waiting for help that probably wouldn't have arrived in time seemed a lot worse than running up to a villain who would have killed you without even giving it a second thought. He can feel his neck burn from how tight it was gripped and how fast the slime pushed through his esophagus. "My fault. Civilian was harmed. Melissa almost died. Should have been more careful. Got too sloppy." It's rather obvious he's got other things on his mind aside from Izuku's questionably reckless heroics, so he'd bite his tongue for now and ignore wanting to ask how he knew the girl personally. Sorry," Izuku says carefully, letting his gaze move down. "I really couldn't think of what else to do. I just saw she was in trouble and ran in." All Might nodded, thoughts. Relaxing just a bit. "Understandable. I imagine anyone in your position would have a hard time staying put. Still, these rules exist to protect you both. The next time something like this happens, contact the proper authorities first." "I did though," he thinks huffily, but says nothing and instead takes the scolding in stride. "Everything worked out, so best not to get hung up on semantics and whatnot." "I meant what I said though," the hero adds, grin seeming to stretch wider. "The girl truly does consider you a hero. You should take pride in knowing your actions help prevent a heinous crime from being committed. Markings of a good hero in the making." Izuku grip on his backpack tightens, the hero's words settling warmly in him. He'd never imagined hearing All Might of all people telling him he showed markings of a good hero in the making. Hell, he didn't even expect to even run into him today. He was expecting the day to end on a sour note, but with such encouragement from the number one hero, all the dread and anger from this afternoon had buried itself into a deep, unreachable place where it could no longer touch him. He couldn't think of anything that could ruin his happiness now. "It's good you didn't use your quirk to fight him though, otherwise I would have had to take you to the station too. Quirk regulation laws and everything, you know." That took the wind out of Izuku's sails quite quickly though. Right, his quirk. The one that hadn't really helped as much as it did when he thought about it. Sure, he was able to read the villain's mind to figure out why he was running, but it did nothing to stop the girl from showing up and being attacked. Or kept him from being nearly choked out. Another squeeze forces Izuku's mouth open and slime pours down his throat and covers his nose, blocking any oxygen from reaching his burning lungs. Someone was screaming. He shook his head clear of that thought and focused on his current dilemma. All Might didn't know about his quirk. He was saying all these nice things because he hadn't told him about Mind Reader or his using it on the villain. He doesn't know what really went down before he showed up. If he knew about his quirk, knew about how useless it was, then take a swan dive off the roof and pray you get a better quirk in your next life. He bites his lip anxiously. All Might's the number one hero. He probably hears this question all the time from every fan he runs into on the street. Too many times to count even. He's said it in enough magazine articles and TV interviews that Izuku could probably riffle through one of those for an answer if he needed one so badly. But this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him, hell, for anyone, and if he didn't do something quick, it'd be gone forever and he'd have nothing to show for it except a memory and Katsuki's cruel taunts ringing in his head. Besides, it couldn't hurt to ask, right? Before he can even begin thinking of the question though, All Might is already walking past him back towards the bridge. He turns quickly, small stumbles barely keeping up with his titan-sized strides. "Wait, where are you going?" The hero stops to look at him, forcing Izuku to stop. "I'm going to take the girl to the police station to make a report while I drop off the villain." he explains, holding up 2 soda bottles filled with familiar-looking green sludge and a deadened eyeball floating alongside its still functional twin. You can get home by yourself, right? While you seem fine, I would suggest perhaps stopping by a hospital on your way back. You never really know. I do hope you take my words to heart and execute more caution in the future. Farewell. Izuku watched him turn, realizing he was actually leaving. But he cries, scrambling for an excuse to keep him longer. Oh, see, can I have an auto dash? All Might points to Izuku's backpack, not even turning around. Already done. Izuku scrambles through his contents and pulls out his journal. Other one young man. He stops, wondering how he even knew as he instead grabs his hero notes, eyes widening as he flips it open and sees All Might's name scrawled across 2 empty pages in black ink. He can practically feel his heart swell with joy, quashing any mild irritation his analytic side probably felt from losing out on page space. He'd probably end up needing to clear space in their curio shelf to make a family shrine for such a treasure. Now then, he says as he continues on his way, breaking Izuku out of his excitement and reminding him of the task at hand. As much as I would love to stick around longer, I must hurry to the police station. Boo, but Izuku stumbles, seeing the man get further away. He realizes he would have to think fast if he wanted him to stay long enough to even get a word in edgewise. He goes for his phone in an attempt to ask for a picture when he feels nothing and remembers. Wait, I called the police already. Unexpectedly, All Might jolts at that, stumbling as he comes to a complete stop. Why, you did you? He asks, trying to sound as calm as possible as he whips around at surprising speed. The words above him flickered from concerned to anxious. She didn't contact Tsukachi yet. Melissa didn't say anything. The boy files away the other name for later and tries to keep his gaze leveled as he spoke. Ida was calling earlier when that girl showed up. I didn't get to finish though, but I didn't hang up, so they must have tried to ping my location. I'm sure there'll be someone here soon. I could call them just to make sure. All Might nods slowly, thoughts still scrambled. How proactive, a very wise decision, young man. However, it is my duty to assure this criminal is processed accordingly. I'm sure it'd be no issue for me to simply drop the villain off myself. In fact, you can tell any officers who arrive I'm handling the situation personally. I'm sure they'll understand. That isn't it against the law to do that though? He counters quickly, and thanks God Arudara made hero civics mandatory for 3rd years aiming for hero schools. Article 539 states that if the police are on their way to a villain attack, any heroes on scene have to wait for them to arrive to process the suspect. Taking him in by yourself is against the law unless there's an officers on scene to contact their superiors to give you permission or the crime's still in progress. My goodness, you're well informed, aren't you? The hero chuckles nervously, obviously not expecting the response. While you make an excellent point, this villain is high priority. Yes, that's it. After all, he escalated from purse snatching to attempted murder in a single afternoon. Plus these bottles might not hold him for long. Best to just get him over to the station than risk him escaping, you know? Izuku stares, somehow simultaneously unimpressed and amazed at the verbal and mental gymnastics the man was putting himself through. Just what was the problem? All Might shouldn't be this worried about the police showing up to pick up a criminal, or resistant for that matter. If anything, it would make things easier and cut out the issue of having to hop to the nearest station. He can understand being a rush to detain the villain, but it's ridiculous how far he's going to make excuses to leave, and yes, Izuku sees the irony quite well, thank you. Honestly, it's almost like, why don't you want the police to see you? He asks, barely masking the confrontation tone his voice held. All Might, to his credit, manages to keep his response much more restrained this time. As I said, this is a dangerous criminal and the girl needs to make a report. It's best he be turned into the proper authorities as soon as possible. The police work with pros long enough to know we have our own way of doing things. I just wish to get this mess settled as soon as possible and let you kids get back to your day. Izuku frowns, eyes narrowed. He might not be that perceptive, but he's experienced it enough times to know when an adult's trying to give him the brush off. He's trying to get rid of me. But the real question is why? What is All Might? Is it All Might? Now that he thinks about it, it's strange the symbol of peace would be just randomly strolling around in casual clothes and not alert anyone of his presence. In such a hurry to do, he's twisting basic hero police procedure just to get Izuku to back off and head home. Pros are busy people. He knows that they have duty to protect the peace, and the last thing he should be doing is holding up one to bother him with such a silly question. Any other normal person would have just chalked it up to the man just being in a rush and leave it at that. However, there's a difference being in a rush and wanting to get rid of someone, and right now All Might's leaning heavily in the latter category. There's also the fact he's trying to get rid of Izuku specifically. He seems to have no issue with the girl Melissa, who he knows, and is doing his damnedest to make it look like they're complete strangers, tagging along to wherever he's going. Izuku could respect wanting to keep a secret, but this was beyond suspicious. Well, I must be off. Take care, young man. All Might says stiffly rather than answer him, readying to leave. Izuku's gaze shoots up, all attempts at secrecy discarded. Have to leave. Time limit's almost up. Can't maintain longer. He doesn't understand what the words mean, but he knows that All Might's not going to stick around for long unless he says something stupid and bad enough to make him feel he has to stay. So, Izuku decides to say something stupid and bad in retrospect. What do you mean by time limit? The man pauses in the middle of making his leap, shoulders tensed. Above him, his words flashed in panic. What did he say? Did he notice? Izuku questions how important this secret is that All Might had such a reaction and how much he should give away about what he knows. If he pressed too hard or said the wrong thing. You said your time limit was almost up. A half-truth it is, because he did say it, just not out loud, and it's vague enough to not lead to more questions. What does that mean? Ardata you dash. All Might is already upon him before he can finish, and he's sorely reminded of how big the symbol of peace is. In the heat of rescue, Izuku would have seen his giant frame as a welcoming sight, a sign that his troubles were over and put his fears to rest. But here alone, under the shadow of the bridge and the hero's warning glare, it made his feel weak and small, like the wrong word would lead to him being left in the alleyway forgotten with his neck snapped. He digs his nails into his palms to keep from reaching for his neck. How much did you hear? He asks, earlier amused tone now layered with a sharper edge. Well, All Might pressed on, you wanted to have my attention, now you have it. Explain. He gapes wordlessly, wholly unnerved by the fact that he even had All Might's full attention after that stunt. He had half expected the man to just brush the comment off. It's what most adults did, even before the mistake with his quirk was discovered. He honestly wasn't prepared for him taking him seriously, or for the secret to be so important that the number one hero's barely contained fear is coming off in such heavy, terrifying waves. He knows he's not trying to scare him, he just wants to know what he said, is worried he let something important slip, but he's scared. I'm sorry, I promise I didn't mean to see it. I just want to know, he stutters, trying to reorganize his thoughts. He's not going to hurt you, you're fine. Did you think someone with a useless quirk can be a hero? All Might looks, and is, rightfully confused at the sudden switch of topics, and at any other time Izuku would have gladly explained himself more properly and apologized, but right now he needed answers that only the symbol of peace could provide, and he was going to take them however he could. A lot of people have quirks that aren't, well, practical for heroism. Like being able to adjust your height slightly, or changing your hair color, or even being able to, know people's thoughts by looking at them. Silly quirks that really don't seem like quirks, or are basically just like being quirkless. Izuku holds up his now autographed notebook, seeing the pages glow below him out of his peripheral while the words above All Might's head flickered around in a frenzied dance. And my quirk's sort of like that, and because of it everyone keeps telling me I shouldn't be a hero. It didn't even help me fighting off that villain. But, well, you're always saying on TV how anyone can be a hero. And that must mean people with quirks like mine, right? I mean, just because it's not flashy doesn't mean it's not helpful. Sure, somehow, my quirk could save someone, because that's the kind of hero I want to be. So I was wondering could I become a hero, like you, when my quirk isn't all that strong or useful? Izuku. told himself not to look up or down while All Might spoke. He didn't want to know, he couldn't know. He couldn't know what his hero truly thought of his dream. For once, he wanted to enjoy the fantasy he crafted for himself, to live in the world he built around his silly, childish hope. For once, he wanted to think someone believed in him. But try as he might, poor foolish Orpheus turned to look anyway, and truly knew despair as his dream turned to ash before his eyes. Inko Midoriya is worried for her son. The police called to tell her he was involved in a villain attack. No one was harmed, thank God, and taken to the station to give a statement, and now required her to pick him up. It had been a stressful wait. The police wouldn't tell her anything beyond that they needed to ask Izuku a few follow-up questions about the attack, and the only company she had to deal with the building distress was the tall, gaunt fellow she met and spoke with in the lounge. He said he was the temporary guardian of the initial victim, who was visiting from America for a scholarship of some kind. Apparently, she was staying at a hotel until they could finish moving her stuff into his apartment and was supposed to meet up with him when he had finished with work, but went out earlier to look around the area and got lost, only to get attacked by the villain. Such an awful way to start out her time in Japan. You don't know how grateful I am to your son Midoriya-san, he smiles. Melissa's father is a very good friend of mine, and I think of her as family. If something had happened, I couldn't bear to look him in the eye again. Inko gave an easy smile despite herself. I'm just glad no one was seriously hurt. To think something like this could have happened. The man nodded, face turning grim. That's just the kind of world we've come to live in, I suppose. They were rather lucky the police arrived in time to detain the attacker. He then turned his gaze back to the double door leading to the interview room. You should probably talk to him about all this afterwards though. While I am grateful to him, jumping into the middle of villain attacks like that is rather unsafe behavior for a 14-year-old. Be bad if he started making too much of a habit out of it and something worse than today happen. Inko lets out a snort she meant to hold in, and has both the courtesy and decency of mind to look scandalized at herself before answering, Why you make a good point, Dudum? The man, realizing they've been talking for hours without him even introducing himself, smiles bashfully at her. Yagi, Tashinori Yagi. She smiles back. Yagi-san then. You're not wrong, it's dangerous behavior. But I doubt I could discourage him, even if I tried. The man's brows rightfully furrowed in confusion. Before she could start explaining though, the police had exited with her son in tow alongside a rather tall-looking blonde girl with glasses following close behind. Guess that must be the Melissa girl, she thinks as they're brought closer. The girl looks their way, and Inko has to take a quick double take. Are they really not related? Blonde hair and blue eyes are rare, even with appearance-altering quirks, and waves politely at the both of them as she's escorted over. Izuku, on the other hand, is quiet as the dead when she sees him. Not that isn't unusual for him. Izuku has never been a talkative child, outside of the subject of heroes and quirks of course, even back then, and his quirk hardly encouraged socializing in the first place. While Inko was no chatty Cathy herself, she often had to get creative to keep conversations going, if she could even get one started with him in the first place. Not to say they didn't talk, oh no, they said a lot of things to each other, like, good morning, and, I'm leaving, and dinner's ready, and is it garbage day? They weren't that detached from each other. They just didn't talk all that much is all. Izuku had become more closed off since his quirk was discovered, especially after. Izuku, I'm sorry. Point was, talking wasn't common in the Midoriya household. Izuku enjoyed his peaceful silences and Inko respected that. This was different than that though, it was like he wasn't registering her presence at all, or anyone's for that matter. He just allowed her to pull him into a hug with no resistance and then be tugged away as she fretted over him like a limp ragdoll. The only show of awareness he had made the whole time was the police telling them they'd call if they had more info or needed testimony and the girl Melissa thanking him for helping her. I was so shocked when you showed up out of nowhere and started trying to pull me out, she says graciously, taking Izuku's hand into her own. Inko can't help but note that her Japanese isn't all that bad. I'm really grateful you came to my rescue, thank you so much. Izuku doesn't even quirk a smile or even look at her, answering so softly Inko near misses it. That I didn't do anything. My feet just moved on their own. The girl seems to miss his dead tone, and just beams brighter. Then I'm glad they were moving in my direction then. Yagi had finished with the officers and turned to face them. Well, we should be going, it's rather late. He then gave Izuku a rather strange look before schooling a much more cheerful expression. Thank you again, young man, you truly are a hero. Inko isn't sure what expression her son had made at the compliment, but whatever it was made Yagi spit blood, or maybe that was just something he did. Inko had go through 5 entire boxes of tissue provided by the officers to help clean up the 2 times he had done so during their conversation, and hurried himself and Melissa out the door. The cab ride back was as dreadfully quiet as the wait at the station. No matter how hard she tried or how many thoughts of concern she sent his way, Izuku just wouldn't speak to her, not even small talk. When they finally got home, he immediately rushed for his bedroom, not even stopping to hear her tell him she'd have dinner ready in a moment. For a while there was no noise, and that just makes Inko's anxiousness over the whole incident spike up again as she tried to get herself to focus on the rice cooker. It was nothing. The officers said no one was hurt, and Izuku hadn't said anything to her. You know why he hasn't. You know exactly why he wouldn't tell you if something happened. You know why, and you're ignoring it. If something had happened, he would have told her. It's been a long, exhausting day. For everyone, and Izuku's probably tired from spending all day stuck in a tiny room speaking to people he didn't know after being attacked by a villain. She just had to make dinner, get him to come out to eat, and everything would be. The sound of Izuku's room door slamming shut is enough to make her realize she's stirred the soup for longer than the recipe stated and that the timer for the cooker went off ages ago. So with a heavy sigh and worry nipping at her heels, Inko turns off the stove and heads straight for her son's room. It was nothing. He was probably just tired and she was fretting over nothing as usual. It's nothing. She makes it 2 feet to the door before she sees it. A box had been left outside, and it had been filled with all of Izuku's All Might merchandise, his toys, his collectibles, even his posters. Some had gaping tears on the side and corners, likely from the haste of getting them down from his wall. Inko remembered taking him to buy these, how his eyes lit up when he held the toys in his hands and played hero, or asked for her help putting the posters up in his room, struggling to keep them straight and making sure the gum tacks didn't damage them. It took her hours cleaning his room because he spent half that time carefully moving every doll from his shelf and refused to let her do anything until they were all accounted for. What if the vacuum eats them up? All Might strong, but he can't fight Susu vacuuming powers. Even his All Might nameplate's in there. She had wanted to write it for him, but he insisted he was a big boy and had to write it himself. Got more ink on his hands than on the tag. He looks so proud of himself when they hung it up. With unsteady hand, Inko lifts a hand to lightly knock on the door. Izuku's sweetheart? She asks politely, can you open the door please? Silence prevailed until she heard the sound of feet shuffling against the wooden floor. There was brief pause before the door creaked open, and her son blankly peeked out at her. He looks rather worse for wear, or maybe he had looked this way coming home and she hadn't noticed. Yes. She begins to uneasily wring her hands. This was harder to do than she thought. Are you hungry? Dinner will be ready soon. Izuku stares, eyes moving slightly. A little. Inko smiles, secretly relieved. He said, a little, that means something. Not much, but it's a start. Oh, that's good. I'm trying out a new recipe I found online, miso chicken and vegetable soup. I had to substitute a few things, but I think you'll like it. Izuku nods slightly and Inko feels her tense shoulders sag. Okay, this is good, he's actually responding. Whatever mood he was in at the station was lifting, or at least weighing less heavy on him. But that doesn't help with the real issue. She tentatively eyes the box once more, struggling to keep her newfound determination from clumsily tipping over. That box that I noticed your All Might toys are in it. Izuku flinches angrily at that, and she flinches at his flinching. Not good, she should probably back away. He's obviously upset about it, and she shouldn't press. She could wait until dinner when he's relaxed and feed. But she made it this far, and he hasn't closed the door, so he must want to talk about. Maybe if she just eased into it. Slide into the discussion slowly. Are you cleaning your room? she asks, ignoring the way her son's eyes narrow as they move upward. Do you need me to dash? Get rid of it. Inko blinks, unsure if she heard correctly. I am sorry? Izuku doesn't answer immediately, just tightens his grip on the doorway. Another look over him makes her realize his eyes are puffy and wet. Had he been crying? Was that why he had been so quiet this whole time? Just get rid of it, he repeats, voice shaking. Sell it, burn it, throw it in a river somewhere, I don't care. He chokes mid-sentence, eyes tearing up. Before Inko could ask more, the door to his room shuts close in her face and Inko is left outside feeling dread pile up in her stomach. It was worse than she thought. Izuku was always a crier, but she knows she should ask what's wrong, that something must have happened. Whatever occurred with that villain or at the police station before she arrived, it was bad enough to drive Izuku to throw away his prized possessions like this, to make him cry like that. She opens her mouth, don't ever talk to me again, and takes a shuddering breath. Do you want me to call you when dinner's ready? As expected, she gets no response. So Inko takes the box, hefting it up slightly to make it easier to carry. All right, she says lamely, earlier resolve now broken and scattered about her like a block tower. I'll come back later, just in case. Whatever it was that was bothering him, she'd have to hold off on getting answers. Because she is too cowardly to talk to her own son, can see her child's upset and needs some time to himself. Izuku would come to her with it eventually, Inko just had to be patient for now. So until then, she'd just hold on to all his things until he felt happy and comfortable enough to take them back. The last thing she'd want to do if toss them out and not have them on hand when he needed them most. Besides, he obviously hadn't meant what he said. It was probably nothing. Poor kid. There's no way he's going to become a hero if his quirk can't even be used to defend himself, let alone help people. It'd be too dangerous for him and others. He'd most likely end up like I did after fighting All for One. If I hadn't managed to make it in time, he and Melissa would have surely no thinking like that. They're both safe now, that's what's important. You can worry about One for All and your impending retirement later. Right now you need to deal with this kid. I'll just not tell the boy what he wants to hear for now. The last thing the symbol of peace should be doing is destroying some child's fantasy, no matter how unrealistic it is. He'll figure out the truth on his own eventually. After all, it isn't bad to dream. Izuku ends up not leaving his room. He spent so much time ridding his room of all that person. He knew there was no point, but it's not fair why, and exhausted by the whirlwind of emotions he was tumbling through that he just threw himself onto his bed and laid there for the rest of the night. He was just not tired and wanted to sleep. Sleep did not come easy though. The hands are wrapped around his throat and he can't get them off. He's trying, but his hands are too small. They can't get a grip and keep slipping through the flesh like water. He can't get loose even as he desperately struggles to get away. And why can't he breathe? The hands tighten and slowly branch out, digging their roots into his skin. Flaming goldfish come flying out of his mouth as a soundless scream rips through him. They buzz around him like angry wasps, whispering in his ear. I'll kill you. I'm sorry, Izuku. Kill you. Beneath me. Kill you. When he finally escaped the nightmare, it was 11:30 and silent gasping sobs were escaping from his mouth. Izuku launches himself up into a sitting position, digging into his arms. You're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fini hour finitiaran 30 hour finesse. Stop crying, Jor. A light knock on the door pulled him out of his panic. Is Izuku? The quiet voice of his mother. Don't call her that. She doesn't deserve it, not after, pierces through the thundering of his heartbeat. Are you awake yet? Izuku takes another steadying breath. You're fine. Yeah, I'm awake. There's nervous shuffling behind the door, like she expecting more. I'm okay then. Well, I'm going shopping and do a few errands. I put your breakfast in the fridge. It's labeled, oh, there's leftovers from yesterday. You can warm up for lunch as well. Izuku's stomach gurgles greedily at the mention of food. Right, he had skipped dinner last night? Okay then, thank you. An awkward silence filled the space between the two of them. Izuku wasn't sure exactly what else to say to her, especially since he was still somewhat reeling from his nightmare. He just wanted to lie down, and why is he still shaking? I'm going to head out now, she finally responded, taking his focus off his white-knuckled hands. Call if you need anything, okay? Izuku nods despite the fact the door is closed and she can't see him. Sure thing. He hears her begins to step away from the door slowly, as though she was expecting him to rush out and stop her, or her footsteps stop halfway though. Oh, I called the school to let them know what happened. You should be fine missing class today. Then take a swan dive off the roof and pray you get a better quirk in your next life. His shoulders arch on instinct. Oh, alright. There's another hesitant pause before the sound of footsteps fade from the hall. He waits until he hears the front door clicks shut and before flopping back down into his bed, clenching his sheets. Izuku knows he should get out of bed, knows he needs to head for the kitchen and eat something. And he's sure he will, when his skin stops vibrating anxiously and his breaths have finally slowed. Katsuki is irritated, and as always, the blame lies solely on Deku. When he arrived at class, the little green shitstain was nowhere to be seen. At first he assumed the dumbass was ducking him because of their talk yesterday. He burns up the image of the stricken look on Deku's face before it could fully materialize. He deserved it, you didn't mean it anyways, until their teacher came in and announced he had gotten attacked by a villain after school and staying home to recover. The extras did their thing and parroted dumb useless words of concern on cue, crying about how awful it was something like that had happened to their classmate and how lucky he was to be alive even though it did nothing, and he knew for a fact none of them gave two sheets. They can crow about wishing him a quick recovery all they'd like, but at the end of the day they were just playing it up for the cheap seats to feel good. The teacher was no better, babbling about how they needed to always be cautious and be prepared and always contact the local authority if they're in danger or feel unsafe and blah blah blah, just regurgitated sheet of stuff their parents repeated just as mindlessly. That wasn't what had Katsuki all in a twist though. It's really cool that Midoriya went up against a villain like that. A random extra with veiny pink hair droned, bouncing on her heels anxiously. If it was me, I would have ran. He's so brave. I just hope he feels better soon, clucks some chicken-headed loser in response, patting her shoulder. It must have been really scary for him. He really is fortunate to have gotten away without a scratch. Katsuki pays no heed to the ridiculous praise while the two numbskull toadies sitting next him waste their time glaring enviously. Man, it's totally unfair, Numbskull one cried, slumping back into his chair. Midoriya didn't even do anything cool and everyone's acting like he walked on water. Numbskull 2 nodded sympathetically at his fellow dumbass complaints. I know, right? How's a loser like that get popular for just getting his butt kicked? Katsuki snorted but made no comment, taking a bite of his lunch. While he usually found their whining annoying, and still does. Only reason he doesn't blast them to Kingdom Come is that the teacher's like how sociable. It makes him look to being shadowed by the dweebs, and sociable looks good on a school resume. He had agreed with the sentiment, villain attacks happen every FING day, yet he never heard any of these fuckers throwing a parade for those victims quite like they did for Deku. Just didn't make any sense to make such a big deal of something so stupid. Wasn't like the fucker had died or anything. He's staring at him horrified, teeth clenched but eyes wide with hurt. Stop it. He started it, it's his fault. He was just playing you like always, and it was his own fault for being stupid enough to try and fight the villain on his own like a dumbass when he knew he was too weak and pathetic to even do anything. He's lucky the police even managed to show up in time to save his butt. There was no reward in praising something so minimal effort. All these extras were doing was worthlessly fawning over a fellow idiot for the same reason the numbskulls were complaining. They all knew they wouldn't have fared any better, would have done and gotten off worse, so they're all leeching onto Deku's stupid stunt so they can feed off his self-generated drama and all feel better about how useless they are. It was pathetic, and so were they. Not Katsuki though. If it had been Katsuki, that FENG villain wouldn't have even dreamed of touching him. He'd have that trash burned to ashes before it had known what happened, and the police would sit there in amazement of this amazing future hero rather than wandering around dumbfounded at how they allowed FNG useless Deku do their jobs for. However, bothersome as it was, Deku's undeserved praise wasn't causing him that much irritation either. In fact, after about 4 days the fawning had died down and everyone went back to focusing on actual important shit. No, what had really gotten his goat was what happened afterwards. Why the F are you here? He hissed as his mom rung the apartment doorbell for him. The teacher said Dezuka was fine and I need to leave the packet, we don't need to go see them. His mother responded with a slap against his noggin. I told you brat, I'm here for moral support. Poor Inko's probably really stressed, it'll help to see a friendly face, and watch your FNG language. He grits his teeth and bites back a curse. He really should have expected that the old hag was going to drag herself along with him to Deku's house after he told her about the teacher asking him to deliver the work he missed, because it was apparently everyone on Deku's week and Katsuki missed the memo. Despite how far the two have come to drift apart, their mothers were still thick as thieves since the day they meet on that stupid neighborhood playdate. It made the whole trying to avoid Deku thing a lot more tougher than it was supposed to be early on when the woman's first go-to for his obligatory playmate was that shitty big-mouthed nerd, though eventually she seemed to get the hint and stop putting them together. Unfortunately, that didn't stop him from being in regular contact with the Midoriyas every chance she wanted, and what Mitsuki Bakuga wants, Mitsuki Bakuga gets. Which now left him here, outside the home of the last fucker on Earth he wants to see because his bitchy hag of a mother wants to play concerned citizen, too, for some effing reason. The door opens at the second ring and Auntie Inko pops out, looking all sorts of surprised at their presence. And Mitsuki? And Katsuki-kun, what are you doing here? Just wanted to make sure you were fine, she says, pinching Katsuki's back as he rightfully snorts at the polite plastic smile she put on. I know we talked about it on the phone, but I just wanted to be sure things were going well. How's Izuku holding up? Auntie Inko's eyes dim at the mention. Oh, he's that fine. We just finished dinner and now he's resting in his room. His mom smiles on, but there's a sharp glint in her eye that catches on to the hesitation in the smaller woman's voice as Katsuki has. You mind if we come in? Oh, I couldn't dare bother you, she says, even though they're the ones intruding on her, and unannounced no less. We really are fine, no need to trouble yourselves. Don't be silly, his mom replies smoothly, taking Auntie's hand. You know you're never a bother to me. And so Katsuki found his quick Dielvoy turned into a stupid house visit, stuck sitting on an armchair with warm tea in hand while his mother made empty small talk. A repeat of school, only Katsuki can't simply drown it out by focusing on schoolwork or calling for everyone to shut their traps already. So he focuses on his environment instead. The apartment really hasn't changed since the last time Katsuki's been here, which feels like ages ago. A few more memorable pieces of furniture are missing and some new unfamiliar ones are taking space, but there are still little things, like the picture of them from the first day of preschool, and the badly hidden stains in the carpet from a poorly planned game of tag in the living room, and dent in the wall they left when Deku wanted to see if he had gotten his mom's quirk and convinced him that throwing a baseball with assistance of his own was the best way to find out. He mentally kicks himself before getting dragged too far into the nostalgia, before he drags up worse memories and, his eyes are wide, staring at him as if to ask why stop making that face I didn't mean it I didn't know that would happen. After what feels like an eternity later, his mother subtly glances his way and levels him a look that basically reads, Scram, the adults need to talk and you're being an eyesore. And Katsuki, being a spiteful bee, would have happily ignored the signal and continued his unsubtle fuming on the armchair because the old bat had taken over the entire FNG point of this trip from him, but the last thing he was willing to let her steal was his sulking. But then he sees Auntie Inko, sees her hands shake as she hands them snacks, watches her squint her puffy red eyes, push back another loose strand PF hair yet miss several others. She looks so worn and tired, like even the smallest breeze will snap her in two. So he excuses himself, grabbing the packet from the table as he heads down the hall to Deku's room. It's irritatingly surprising that he automatically knows where to go despite not visiting for so long. When he gets to the door, an immediate sense of wrongness hits him like a freight train as his eyes scramble to figure out what's so out of place that it has his senses raised to search and destroy what the ever's freaking him out. It takes him only a second to realize what's wrong is that Deku's stupid All Might nameplate isn't there. He remembers because he was so used to seeing it so many times when he used to come over, before their quirks came in, before the anger that bloomed at the sight of each other, before he found out Deku for the fake sack of shit he is. He goes for the door and leaves the packet laying against the door frame. It's why they came anyway. The quicker he does it, the quicker they can leave and he can stop being assaulted by this building unease and the blurring image, that stupid hollow smile at those confused, hurt eyes. It's not my fault, didn't want that to happen, don't feel bad, that's how he got you last time he lied first, not you. He turns to head back, only for noise from the living room area to get his attention and keep him frozen in place. Katsuki's not one to snoop, because that's a coward's move to just FNG hide and listen into shit that's none of your business, but the talking's loud enough to draw him in anyways. I just don't know what to do, Mitsuki. Auntie Inko sobbed, voice thick with worry. Something obviously happened, but he won't tell me. He hears his mother move from her spot on the sofa. Maybe it's just shock. That happens a lot with villain attacks, doesn't it? Maybe he's still processing it. But it's not just that. There's the sound of tissues being pulled. I thought it was fine. He's just tired, he just needs rest. He's always been careful about villains, so I figured everything was okay. I mean, he'd tell me if it wasn't, right? The sofa shifts again and a desperate sniffle follows the movement. But it's been days and he still won't leave his room. I can barely get him to eat anything or even talk to me. I've never seen him like this. Inko. What if it wasn't just a fight? What if the villain did something to him and he's too scared to tell me? What if it? The rest of the sentence is lost to the sobbing and the thundering of blood rushing past his ears. Katsuki is feeling too many things from this conversation that he doesn't understand, but what he does understand is that the source is only a step away from him. Katsuki doesn't stay to hear the rest, just marches over to the room, teeth clenched and hands popping with violent sparks, desperate for kindling. He's not sure what he wants to say, but his mouth is already moving despite nothing really human sounding coming out of it. Katsuki, we're leaving. Katsuki hesitates, fist raised as he stares down the bare door and wonders about his next act. He should do it, he should just bust in and smash dumb Deku's face in and ask him what the F he's doing, putting poor auntie through, this acting like a goddamn baby just because his feathers got ruffled a little? He doesn't understand. Katsuki's knocked Deku around plenty and he's never reacted to it, but he'll buckle and tuck his tail between legs over trash that couldn't even handle him. And FING background character, is he weaker than some trash villain to him then? How weak was he if a villain derails him so easily? How can you say you're going to FANG beat me and then lost to one shitty villain? Oi brat, did you hear me? Katsuki turns on the dime, eyes still flaring red with hate and conflict. I heard you, I'm already on my way. He ignores his mother's screech over his cussing, with cussing of her own mind you, and levels the door one last look. FING pathetic. He spits harshly, and to think I was about to take your challenge seriously. What FING joke? He walks away before he can even hear the lack of a response. Izuku sits in his room, staring at the bold, striking words decorating his 13th hero journal. His mother has gone out shopping again, so he's just alone with himself and his thoughts. Now that he's getting a better look at it, he realizes how sloppy the handwriting is, like it was done in a rush with very little care for legibility, yet enough practiced ease you'd never even notice. He must be used to it, Izuku thinks, blankly following every slide. He's the #1 hero after all. Thousands of people have probably asked for his autograph, enough so that he probably does it on instinct at this point. He's surprised he even came to the conclusion that Izuku even wanted one, and he would have wanted one, enough to sell his kidney and half his liver for it. Then again, all his stuff had the hero's face on it and was laid out in that tunnel for all the world to see. Anyone would have thought so. God, he must have looked so FNG pathetic. He throws the notebook in anger, an action he'll definitely regret later, but right now he's too wound up to care about future him or his feelings at the moment, and screams into his pillow for what feels like the 100th time. Ever since that stupid incident in the tunnel with All Might and the slime villain, there's been something thrumming under the surface of his skin, something that was constantly prickling at him and leaving him frustrated and exhausted, and Katsuki's little visit yesterday had somehow made it worse. He's just so mad. Mad at Katsuki. It's not fair. Why did you come here to gloat? Why you don't know you didn't see that glare, see the threats, see the sea of slime, and he's drowning, someone help. Mad at his mother. Why did she bring them here? Why did she let them in? She knows how he feels. Why? Mad at All Might. Don't saw his name, liar, you looked me in the eye, you smiles while you did it, how could you? You're supposed to a hero, right? Mad at his stupid, useless Quirk. Tell him what he wants, can't get him mad, he'll tell everyone. He removes his face from the pillow and lays on his back, staring at his ceiling. His eyes sting from overuse, unable to produce any tears because he already cried himself dry this morning. He's mostly mad at himself though. You're certain to become a wonderful hero. For being so stupid, for thinking he could fight a villain when he could barely face Kaken even on a bad day, for foolishly thinking that maybe it'd be different, for hanging his hope on such flimsy thread that the fact that they took so long to snap despite the years of fraying was a miracle in itself. For believing, even hoping for even a moment that anyone would take his dream seriously. Did he honestly think things would be different? Did he really think if he kept asking for belief he knows he won't receive, and that he's too cowardly to even give himself, that it would just plop into his lap one day? Why ask a question he already knew the answer to? Why put himself through the charade of playing the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed boy who could read minds and would receive the noble blessing of his hero to become one himself? Why was he so weak, so cowardly, that he needed someone, his hero, his friend, his mother, anyone to give him permission to seek out his dream? He hates it, hates this stupid heavy weight on his heart, hates this hopelessness, hates that he's so pathetic. He clicks his tongue furiously, also hating that, unfortunately, Katsuki is right. He's being pathetic, hiding in his room like this. It wasn't the first time he's had a close call with a villain, a natural casualty to be expected of someone who made a habit of running towards the flames and screaming to watch heroes and their enemies fight it out in broad daylight. Once or twice a battle got too heated or containment took too long and Izuku found himself in near peril, but it never was that bad. But those villains have never been that close before, never touched him. He can still feel the slime crawling down his throat. He can't breath, help me. The buzzing under his skin increases full force and causes the inside of his mouth to burn. So Izuku forces himself up and begins to wander his room with no real destination or goal except to avoid keeping still because that seemed to be the only thing that made it bearable. He needs to do something about it soon because he's not sure how much longer he can keep it at bay, or how many more days of school he can miss before it starts piling up. He circles past his desk for the umpteenth time when he finally stops to stare at his calendar. It was the only piece of All Might, liar, he had left in his room. He rips it down to flip through the pages and lands on August. I zeroed in on the date circled with red ink. Inko Midoriya sits calmly in her kitchen, thoughts cold and muddled. She thought when Izuku finally stopped locking himself in his room, that things were going back to normal. It made her sick she couldn't do anything to help Izuku those past 4 days. As always, you wait till the problem solves itself instead doing something, but she was happy her son was okay now. He was finally going to class to catch up with his studies, holding down his meals, going out more. He even started exercising recently, saying it was training for the UA entrance exams. The conversation went no further after that. It was a touchy topic for both. Inko honestly though things had gotten better. As of 2 months ago, that was no longer the case. She's no sure when it started, but as the days passed Izuku started coming home later and later, bruises and scrapes littering his knees, and this time there are no half-baked stories of roughhousing from neighbors and children to explain them away. He's also been staying up more, and getting dark circles under his eyes from the lack of sleep. He's gotten more clumsy too, bumping into things right in front of him, tripping over his own feet, dropping things after being handed them. The worst of it though is the growing absent-mindedness. Day after day his mind seems to wander further away from everything. His teacher called with complaints about him zoning out in class, and he's become so forgetful, leaving behind his textbooks, his lunch, even his backpack at one point. Yesterday at dinner she had to use her quirk to rip his knife away from him because he came too close to chopping off his fingers without realizing it. Inko keeps telling herself to say something, to sit down with him and ask what's going on. Exercising can be brutal, yes, but not to the level her sons seem to have taken it. But every time she gets close she falters, she hesitates, she makes excuses. He likes his privacy. I don't want to seem overbearing, I'll ask when he gets back. Now she was sitting in the kitchen, listening to her son shuffle around in his room for his books. It's Sunday, so he's heading to the library for studying, preparing for a conversation she has no idea how to start. Just ask him to take the day off. She hisses at herself as she hears the door to his room close. One day, just tell him to stay home for one day and get this over with. Izuku barrels out into the hall, a mess of curls and a sloppy hoodie he's still trying to put on as he mumbles something about Quirk ethic laws in the prefecture. She calls out to him, breaking the spell and allowing her to get an actual look at him. The poor thing's barely keeping steady, his socks are mismatched, and his hair's a bigger bird's nest than it usually is. She's surprised he hasn't collapsed in on himself yet. She begins, heart pumping as she steels herself. She knows she can do this, knows she needs to do this. For both their sakes she needs to power through. Then she makes the mistake of staring to her son gaze, his wild, dissecting gaze. Always searching, always trying to see something, and panics. She can't do this, he knows she can't say it, she knows she needs to, they need to have this conversation. Look at him, he's skin and bones, his eyes are bloodshot and bumped into the doorway when he came in. You need to say something, tell him. I noticed you hoodie was on backwards. You should fix that. Izuku has the decency to flush before righting his clothes, then sweeps past her, stooping down to put on his shoes. She knows she needs to call out to him again. She knows she needs to stop and tell him whatever he's doing is no good. She knows she needs to find out what's wrong. She knows she needs to stop being a coward and say something. So she instead sits back down and sighs, growing more frustrated with herself and the situation as the door closes with a solemn click. He always had close calls with villains. It came with being a hero fanboy who liked to run up to hero battles and get a front row seat of the action. Those times were plenty scary too, but he always got over it, just like he'll get over this. He just needed something to get his mind off it, and training for UA seemed like a perfect distraction. He should have been preparing ages ago anyway. He only had 8 months and he wasted a near week of one moping around. Izuku wasn't even sure why he put it off for so long. The most stablest of times in Izuku's life, sadly, is when his routine fell into patterns. So patterns are what he relied on. He starts by jogging, a little light workout that started around his neighborhood block and expanded itself street by street as the months passed by. He started putting more work into his studies, surprising his teachers as his average grades slowly but surely rose. He started learning English, and this time not just to spout out heroic catchphrases alongside the TV. He slowly added weights to his regime, updated his hero notes every chance he got, looked up videos on self-defense. Despite how much he would have liked real legitimate lessons, he realizes his deadlines way too narrow and his current schedule too packed to fit them in or get him where he needs to. If he lagged behind or missed a day, he'd put double into the next one, then triple into the one after, then quadruple into the rest. And every time his hands shook, every time his neck burned, every time his caught Katsuki's hateful eyes and angry words, every sight of that mocking grin and whisper, "Kill you," in his dreams that tried to pierce his skin, he'd masterfully smothered with a new hobby, a new skill, a new lesson. Anything to push the buzzing off into the back of his mind. It all worked out pretty great, until he collapses in the middle of his run about 4.5 months into his training. He's not sure what happened. He was doing fine, making his 4th lap when his body just suddenly quits on him. His chest seized and his legs turned to jello, tangling around each other as he hit the ground with a wet, painful thud and blacked out. Izuku bobs in and out of consciousness during the time, limbs heavy and head throbbing. Voices pierce the veil a few times, but overall it's all quiet and he feels oddly at ease with himself in the darkness. Then he feels something wet and slimy touch his neck. "Kill you." He jumps to his feet and scrambles away, heart leaping into his throat. Where is he? He was outside, now he's here. He doesn't understand what happened. Where is he? Don't hurt me, please. Hands slip into his and he grips them like they're anchors, certain he'll be pushed away by the roaring tide of his panic if he doesn't. "Breath with me." He tries to do as the voice says, but his lungs are moving too fast, his skin is thrumming again and he can't. Something cool and soothing rushes through his veins, Like small little ice cubes are being dropped into the hollow of his bones one by one. All of a sudden he's slowing down. He can actually feel his heartbeat fall into a calming, steady pace, echoing terror dying out long enough to let him focus and get his bearings. He's in a break room of some kind, sitting on a rather small couch, being blankly stared at by a dark-haired girl with swirling mint eyes who looked to be only 2 years his senior, dressed in a white dress shirt and black slacks. He also realized there's a band-aid plastered to his forehead and a bloodied towel on the floor. What dash? One of the regulars saw you brain yourself outside, she answers coolly, releasing his hands in one quick motion. So we brought you into the back room till you came to. Feeling all right? Yeah, he slurs out, flinching as he numbly catches sight of the deep red divots his fingernails have left on the brunette's hand. She notices, the delicate formal script above her head twinkling with concern. That's good. Sorry for using my quirk on you, it looked like you needed help calming down. Izuku shakes his head. No, it's fine. I mean, probably good you did. He carelessly ripped his hand away from his neck when he realized it was moving too close. His mouth feels dry and those bleeding crescents seem to be staring at him judgingly. I would like to know what your quirk is? It seems pretty amazing. If she catches his wandering gaze again, she makes no effort to call him on it. It's called synchronicity, she explains. Lets me make people match my body's rhythm. Sort of a my-pace quirk, I guess. Only really works if I'm touching them though. He nods, brain greedily latching onto the info so it can explore every amazing and powerful avenues it can form with the ability so Izuku can stop staring at the slow trickle of red coming off her pale hands. Once they're cleaned and bandaged, Izuku's handed back his workout supplies and she catches his shoulder, gentle and casual, she makes sure to ask and confirm he can see her hand. You're not the first, she says gently, in a tone he would have found somewhat comforting if not for circumstances, gotten way worse than a few fingernail marks for the same. Don't worry about it too much. His eyes almost trail over to her hands again when he sees her words flash out of the corner of his eye. He feels bad. Probably a relapse. Don't let him dwell. So Izuku does his best to keep his eyes forward, and wonders, truly how often the girl has to force ice water down people's veins for their own sakes. They exit from the break room into a bar area of some kind. Or at least he thinks it's a bar? It's rather brightly decorated in honeyed golds and blacks, with a kitchenette and delicate little display cases showcasing food on the far left while the 2/3 of the back is occupied by a bar lounge with tables interspersed in between. It feels more like some diner-cafe bar hybrid more than anything, like the owner couldn't decide what direction to go with it and just put whatever they could in. It looks like they're getting ready for closing it seems, the girl taps his shoulders. It was a slow day, you didn't interrupt anything, and he spots a tall-looking woman with bright orange hair putting away an instrument while talking to a scruffy-looking older mantis person leaning on some boxes. Hey boss, Sleeping Beauty's awake. The girl announces loudly, and Izuku can't help but squirm at the dissecting gazes being leveled at him. Hello, he manages to mumble. Sorry I passed out in front of your establishment. The ginger-haired woman snorts, visible golden eye twinkling with hidden mischief. S'fine, so long as you don't make too much of habit of it. It's pretty lucky one of the nicer ones spotted you though, everybody else would have left you out there to get mugged. Izuku forces out a rather awkward laugh at the blunt teasing. Her words, despite their rather twisted font, seemed sincere in their relief. Hey, don't tell him that, cried the mantis, scythe-like hands waving around in a scolding fashion. Don't want him thinking everybody in the hood gonna jump him when his back's turned. Folks here are a lot nicer than dat. The brunette rolls her eyes. Don't take it too seriously. If it helps, you're a common sight around the block. Someone would have picked you up and brought you here. Izuku blinks. He's only added the area to his run about a month prior. He didn't really expect to seen as a community fixture so fast, really. Yep, everybody's kind on made a game of trying to spot you on you route. The ginger-haired woman grins, hand cupped over her hand as she staged whispered at them. Poor Scissorhands there almost fainted when he heard about your face plant 'cause he had money riding on when you'd make it past Karui's store today. If mantises could blush, they'd be ashamed that they couldn't achieve the color this man did. He leaves after being insisting yes, he did not need to be helped to the train station or have anyone called, being handed a doggy bag that he fails to give back or pay for. Consider taking it your way of apologizing for almost bleeding all over our floors. They say, and shut the door before Izuku could even think of giving it back. When he does get home, fails to avoid being spotted sneaking back into his room to hide the giant bandage. He opens the bag to find a box of peppermint tea and a package of rice crackers with a little note. Moderation is key. He falls back into his desk chair with the snacks in hand, stomach protesting the thought of food despite running on empty the entire day. He ends up ripping open one of the packages anyways, scarfing down the crackers with unrestrained fervor. They're honey-flavored, giving it a nauseatingly sweet aftertaste. He still finishes the whole bag. The day for the UA entrance exams comes quicker than Izuku expects. He dons a thick winter coat and an even thicker scarf and rushes out into the cool late August air to head for the train station, surrounded by thousands of other equally tense and excited hopefuls awaiting the place that would soon cast judgment upon them and the dreams they've been carrying for 6 long months. He feels the train ride needs to be longer but also wishes it would never end. You're fine, you're fine. Izuku whispers, clutching his backpack close to his chest. He heaves in a breath, feeling the telltale sighs of prickling buzz flaring up under his skin. He curled into himself, heart beating violently against his rib cage as every nerve in his body struggled to settle on being nervous of the coming trial ahead or paranoid over an invisible danger her couldn't perceive. He was fine, things were going to be fine, he was going to get through this and be fine. He's just being pathetic as usual. Inko Midoriya sits in the kitchen, nursing a warm cup of tea. Her son has just left for his high school entrance exams and she hasn't any errands to run, leaving her with the house to herself and a lot of time on her hands. I'm going. I'll call after it's over. She takes another sip. It's rather delicious. The box Izuku gave her says the brand comes from a store in Shizuoka. Shame she couldn't get him to drink any. He always rushes out the door before she can offer to make him some. Izuku pores over his hero notes for what feels like the 100th time, barely even skimming over the words as phantom pins needled him all over. It had started on the train ride over to UA's campus and hadn't stopped the entire time. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. The train itself was adequately heated, nothing and no one wet was touching him or his neck, he had a good night's rest, he actually stayed to finish breakfast. What had he done wrong? He thought he was getting better at this, after 2 weeks had passed and the prickling hadn't occurred. Thought that he had finally killed the beast whose sole purpose seemed to be to sneak up upon him and peck at the back of his brain with this painful anxiousness that wouldn't tell him what there was to be anxious about. You're fine, you're fine. He repeats to himself, rereading a line about potential temperature limits on Endeavor's quirk, hoping that if he keeps his mind on anything else, the pricking will go away again. He couldn't afford to fall apart now, not when he's so close, not after all the work he put in, not when he's so close. Not when this is his only chance to finally give his dream flight. The buzzing doesn't stop, despite his best efforts. He manages to make it off the train and into UA as quickly as he can, muttering a quick apology to the girl he accidentally rams into on the way over. Once he's inside, he heads for the nearest seat and plants himself there, teeth gritted as he grips the seat arms for dear life. You're fine, what wrong with you? There's nothing wrong, why are you acting like this? Nothing's happened, so why won't it stop? You need to make it go away, make it stop. An unknown hand touches his shoulder and he smacks it away hard, looking up with sudden, unexplainable hostility that was pouring out of his every pore. The fuchsia-haired girl with pigtails stares at him stricken as she cradles her hand, and it's in that snap second of allowed clarity that he's able to realize is she just wanted to see if he was okay, and there are more people than before, and they're all staring at the both of them, all confusion and disapproval. Izuku stares wide-eyed, trying to come up with an excuse, an apology of some kind. It's the least the person deserves. She was trying to help him after all. But his mouth is bone dry and his voice is trapped in his throat, like thick layer of liquid is filling the inside and pressed against it. Say something, you need to apologize, what's wrong with you, why can't I breath? Geez, well sorry for bothering you. She sniffed, words seething in luminous fury as she storms away to another section, and Izuku is left with the last residues of his abrupt irritability being drowned in ice-cold shame and guilt. It makes him barely notice that the buzzing ceased and that the uncomfortable sting of goosebumps was slowly going numb. After some time has passed, the auditorium lights die down, leaving the only sources of brightness the stage lights below and the tiny twinkle of thoughts belonging to every student present. It's honestly a little blinding for him, so he tries to keep his eyes on the podium as none other than famous voice hero President Mike appears on stage. "Good morning, listeners." The lanky blonde man shouts, all good cheer and smiles. "Welcome one and all to UA's entrance exam. Can I get an oh yeah?" A few students managed to humor the man's request and whopped loudly while the rest flinched at the volume or stared blankly ahead, deep confused at the fact that the start of their exam intro was being treated like a concert opening. "Whoa, hold on a minute there." He pouts, grabbing the microphone and strutting out boldly from behind of the podium. "Don't tell me y'all are gonna leave me hanging? Now I know you little listeners got more, plus ultra, than that." Another beat of awkward murmuring passes before his grin grew wider. "All right, now let's take it from the top," he says and shots a fist towards the ceiling. "Good morning, listeners, and welcome to the UA entrance exams. Can I get an ooh yeah? This time everyone joined in, some a little less enthusiastically than asked, mostly because most wanted to move on already, but they still managed to at least put some soul in it. "That's more like it." He laughs. "I know y'all came a long way and it's way too early, so sit back and relax while I give you the ditty on what you'll be expecting for this little test of ours." Mike begins going over the basics. The entrance exam is 50-50 for each section, and earning enough points on both would guarantee them a spot in the department of their choice. The written portion will be about 3.5 hours long, which seemed excessive in Izuku's opinion, but it was UA after all, and they're nothing if not overtly excessive. They would be given and directed to a randomly assigned classroom for their tests before being given a short break in the cafeteria. Snacks would be provided, of course, courtesy of UA's own kitchen staff. Afterwards, the secondary portion would begin. Those who were enrolling in the general education department would return to the main classroom for another test. Those aiming for support would be herded to UA's patented labs, where they would turn in their work portfolios before being given a practical exam overseen by the head of the department. The UA's business course hopefuls would go to the third year's floor for a rather lengthy and in-depth interview. Rather overwhelming, but overall simple tests necessary for showing off how much they deserved being made part of the student body and their respective departments. The hero course exam, however, apparently required a bit more in-depth explaining students where to go to the fields before being split into groups and sent to UA's artificial city, where they'd be going face-to-face with robots specially designed for their test to allow them to show off the destructiveness of their quirks and the skill directing them. There were to be 3 robot types, according to the display board, released into the city for them to fight, each assigned with a different point value. The more you destroy, the higher your score, and you would do good to aim to get as many as possible. Izuku leaned back, biting his nails as he mulled over the information. He figured it wasn't going to be easy, but he didn't think he'd being given such a huge handicap. His quirk was at a complete disadvantage, and despite all the working out he had done in the past 6 months, he doubted he'd be able to land a punch strong enough to even put a scratch on any of them, or could outrun one if necessary. There's also the issue of the fact that they weren't telling them what the point cutoff was, most likely to encourage them to gain as many points as possible. That meant Izuku not only had to find a way to damage them significantly enough to count, but find a way to do so repeatedly enough he could pass. There was also the issue of avoiding getting ganged up on, if he couldn't use his quirk to predict his opponent's movements then. "Excuse me," cries a lone voice from the third section, breaking his concentration quickly enough for him to see a rather well-built blue-haired boy with glasses in a rather prestigious-looking school uniform rise up amongst the crowd. "But I noticed a mistake with your explanation. You claim there are 3 types of robots to get points from, but there are 4 on display. I do not wish to believe an illustrious academy like UA would make such a grievous error." Everyone turned to whisper to their neighbor. They had noticed too, and few felt it was a bit odd. But they figured they'd wait until President Mike had gotten to that point of the lecture to explain it. Apparently, the blue-haired boy was not as patient. "And you," the dark-haired boy continues, stiffly pointing in Izuku's direction, "you've been muttering this entire time. It's rather disrespectful to be talking during the introductory lecture, not to mention disruptive. If you aren't going to take this seriously, then I highly suggest you leave." Small pearls of stifled laughter echo throughout the auditorium, but any embarrassment he should have felt from hearing them or realizing he had been talking out loud was bypassed by the angry tone tickling at something familiar in the back of his head, painful, fearful, shameful, that mixes in with the leftover smoldered embers of his irritability from before, especially when he sees how the boy is glaring down at him. Before he could even tell himself that he was taking it too seriously, that red piercing glare was just his imagination, that there was no blonde hair hidden that sea of indigo, Izuku's already sharply turning his head, teeth bared and ready for a battle that's not even occurring. "Hey now kids, save that fire for the practical. Mike cuts in, putting the growing hostilities on ice real quick. Now, to answer your question, listener number 7111, you're right about there being 4 types up here. The 4th is called the 0-pointer, which will appear in each battle quadrant. As the name states, it ain't worth any points, so while not impossible to beat, it's best y'all not to waste your time and just ignore it when it shows. The bespectacled boy bows, satisfied that his question's been addressed, and seems to level Izuku one last look at before sitting down while the other turns his gaze away from the whispers of the crowd as the rest of the exam lecture continued. Izuku spends the remainder forcing that ice-cold shame from earlier to return, to make him acknowledge what he was about to do, to make him remember he had no clue where Kaken Katsuki was sitting. As expected, UA does not work in half measures, especially when it comes to their written exams. Everyone receives their assigned classrooms alphabetically, and each group is ushered into a classroom down in the south wing of the school. The rooms are all overseen by an instructor, who tells them the test will consist of 3 packets to fill out. The test shall be covering a variety of subjects, from arithmetic to the heroics zeitgeist, and includes a lengthy essay. Yes, you are allowed to skip questions, yes, bathroom breaks are allowed, yes, the test really is 3.5 hours, and no, they aren't joking. No speaking is allowed once the test starts. All eyes are to be kept on your test packets, and remember that the instructors have been thoroughly informed of the quirks of the applying students, so no forms of cheating, physical or quirk-like, will be tolerated. The seriousness of this threat is made abundantly clear 40 minutes in when a boy with an X-ray quirk is caught attempting to see through his neighbor's back to look at their test sheet. One quick "you're done," and he ends up escorted out of the room. The first hour goes by in a slow, unending blur of bubble sheets, calculations, and historical speech translations. Once or twice a student gives a noise of hopelessness and frustration, but they power through. The next hour moves just as snail-paced, with the steady sound of pencils and breathing being the only sign that anything's happening. No one attempts to ask for erasers, no one stands to stretch, no one stops for anything. A student abandons their test 15 minutes into the third hour and ignores the instructor's calls for them to return to their desk as they slam the door shut, and still no one moves. This test in their only way into the haven of Yua, into the place they spent a good 6 months bleeding, sweating, and crying over to get to the first stage for. They aren't ready or willing to risk it for any reason. Eventually Izuku ends up getting close enough to done that he decides to take a quick bathroom break. He pops his limbs and moves down the hall as quickly as he can, attempting to remember the instructor's directions while he takes a moment to settle his brain. The phantom buzz under his skin hasn't made a reappearance yet, but he can't help but feel anxious about it, worry that it will reappear when he's least able to defend against it. He gets past a corner when he spots a gray-haired boy in a rather oversized school cardigan standing nervously in the middle of the hall, words flickering with worry over searching for something. He looked rather confused and he had all his stuff with him. "Did you finish early?" he asks, catching the boy off guard and causing him to quickly stand at attention. "Oh, why yes." He mumbles quietly, running a finger nervously though his rather long bangs. "I was going to head to the bathroom first, but Ida got lost." Izuku's eyes move upward. The boy's font is surprisingly smooth and direct despite how quiet the boy himself was. Izuku could almost barely hear him when he spoke. "Oh gosh. Saw me just standing there. Looked so stupid. You didn't look stupid. Izuku answers automatically, and the boy looks ready to die on the spot as his thoughts flutter and blink in bewildered embarrassment while he himself flinched at his own tactlessness. What was wrong with him? He should know better, know not to answer a stranger's thoughts like that. I mean, I don't think you look stupid. Why no, as a thing. The boy doesn't respond, tugging his bangs even harder than before. Izuku panics, tries to recover himself. Sorry, my quirk showed me you were worried about looking stupid, and, I wanted to tell you you shouldn't be worried about it, which I just did because I didn't want you feeling bad about being lost, and not that you should, just that, well, you shouldn't have to feel you should, you know? Izuku sighs. Do you want to just, follow me to the bathroom? It's where I'm heading anyways. The gray-haired boy nods, and moves aside as Izuku leads the way. The entire trip is filled with a rather awkward silence that never really gets filled, despite both their best efforts to form a conversation. Izuku's quirk didn't help either. He could see how uneasy and jumbled the boy's thoughts were, and it made it difficult to engage with him when he knew he was directly contributing to the socially stifling atmosphere with no clue how not to. Furthest they got to anything remotely conversational was acknowledging how gargantuan the UA campus was and how it would have been more helpful to have provided them with maps. Once their business is taken care of, they exit the bathroom hastily, avoiding eye contact as Izuku checked the time. He still had 24 minutes left, should have enough time to get back to the testing room and finish the rest of his test. Izuku begins stiffly, rubbing his arm awkwardly. I'm not going to head back now. Good luck on the rest of the exams. The boy nods, shuffling about as equally uncomfortable. Thanks, you too. The meeting ends just as briefly and awkwardly as it began, and both split apart. The designated break PRD was a godsend to the gathered students after spending so much time hunched over a desk for 3+ hours straight. Everyone dug into the handed-out miniature box lunches with the intensity of starved men who had just escaped from the Sahara, barely caring for manner or dining etiquette as they stuffed their faces and filled their stomachs. The meal was light, but God was it filling to those who had been forced to forego breakfast to avoid being late to the earlier orientation. Besides, most there understood why they had kept the meal so small. The second part of the gauntlet couldn't be faced properly on a full stomach. Once the teachers had announced that the break had ended, the students all stood with their empty boxes in hand, eyes burning with blinding determination. It was time to face their Goliaths. General education course applicants tensely headed back for the main hall, where they'd be splintered off again for yet another round of tests. Support course applicants were sent off to the eastern side of the building, portfolios in hand and eagerly awaiting the practical they'd receive. Management course applicants shuffled off heartily to the northern staircase to head for the third floor, excitedly wondering who would be handling their interview portion. The hero course applicants grew quiet, however, nerves tightened and hearts steeled as they threw away their plates and made their way outside. The artificial cities were special training grounds owned by UA that were used for heroics training by the already enrolled students. They were built in concert by a famous hero agency architecture firm, several construction companies, and pro-hero Cementos, with the idea being to create something that could help students learn more about urban battle tactics. There were about 12 sectors in total, with each city ranging to about 9,842 square kilometers, that slowly expanded by the year as the heroics program evolved, and designed to perfectly mimic a real-life cityscape. Rumor has it that it even rivaled Tokyo's metropolitan area in size. Izuku was unable to take in and admire any of this, however, as he was doing his best to wade through the gathering students and their near-blinding waves of nervous thoughts. After he and the rest were speedily brought to off-campus changing rooms, hero course applicants were informed ahead of time to bring a change of personal gym clothes with them for the second half. They were split into several groups and taken by bus to the artificial city's arena for the second half of their exam. Izuku's group was dropped off at City D, only given instructions being that they were to remain in the area until the start of the test was announced. A bit vague and frustratingly unclear, if he was being honest. All the students present in his group had begun to do warm-ups or chat with each other, but it did nothing to dim the growing unease they were all feeling as they fretted and worried over when the test was starting, how they would fare against the robots. How big of a point doc did the written portion have? And poor Izuku was in the thick of all that worry, near blinded by the intensity of their anxiousness. He at least near bumped into someone trying to get away from it all and find a place to clear his head and his line of sight. Izuku finally managed to find an open space where he could stretch and think for a minute, wondering how he's going to handle the issue of his quirk. I could use the environment to my advantage, he mumbled, calculating all the various potential sharp corners, uneven ground, and narrow alleyways he could use to damage or slow down his robotic opponents. There was also taking advantage of the various building and open window stores to escape ones he's having trouble dealing with. He spots a few students staring in his direction, scaring them off as he turns theirs. It makes him realize that he doesn't know a single person in the area, or recognize them from anywhere. A small part of him is relieved that Katsuki is nowhere in sight and nowhere near him. That's the last thing he needs right now. Maybe I should try talking to someone, he thinks, pushing down the embarrassing hallway encounter before it could rear its ugly head. It would be nice to have a warm-up partner, and it definitely wouldn't hurt to try speaking to someone, establish some form of early friendship so he can shake off this growing unease and do some damage control for what happened during the introductory assembly. Izuku looks around and spots an orange-haired girl with a side tail in a teal top, doing arm stretches. She seems approachable, and her thoughts are squarely focused on her warm-up, so he doesn't have to say any stupid and look socially inept or mentally invasive. When he looks back on the memory, when he pulls back the haze of panic and anger, he honestly wished he had handled it better. He turns and takes 2 steps forward. A hand tightly clamps onto his arm, pulling him back slightly, and a cold, accusatory voice rumbles behind him. What do you think you're doing? Where do you think you're going, Deku? Izuku's brain stops and he freezes, not even listening to the rest of the words blowing onto the back of his head as his body sends 10,000 different messages to itself. Run away. Stand your ground. Get away. Let go. He rips his arm away like it's being burned, and it feels like it, like there's some unseen heat building up under his skin. Turning around and ready to yell at Kaken to leave him alone, already it hurts. Except it's not Katsuki, but the bespectacled boy from the assembly behind him, now dressed in what looks like a custom-made blue and black running suit, and expensive too, if that elastic sheen is anything to go by, staring down at him like he had just caught him trying to stab someone. His eyes drift over other surrounding students who are making passing glances at them. Weirdo from the assembly. Look how he flinched. Shaking like a leaf. Looks like less competition. I asked you what you're trying to do? The boy repeats sternly, and Izuku's attention moves back as his mouth rushes to make an apology he's not even sure he even needs to make. Say no. That was the last thing on his mind, that he just wanted to say hello and make a friend, and that was it, to please stop staring at him with those cold, doubtful red amber eyes. Then he looks up at the boy, past the disapproving from, past the eyes coldly narrowed at him in suspicion, past the overlapped phantom blonde hair fading from the dark blue, to the shimmering words above. Trying to sabotage someone? Such shameful behavior. Unfit for you. He doesn't hear the boy repeat his question, or the watching students whispering, or even the sound of his own breathing, just the words, unfit for you, echoing against the hollow of his skull, loudly, hissingly, cold and cruel, and digging into every part of his brain. And last I checked, that didn't include you. Just shut up. It takes a few hushed gasps from the crowd that's gathered around them to make him realize he said this aloud. The taller boy is taken aback, and sputters in alarm, I beg your pardon. How utterly rude. A small part of him is screaming at himself to apologize, to explain, but it's being drowned out by that grating echo and the loud beating of his own heartbeat. The scratching from the assembly returns, digging at that familiar feeling that has him suddenly feeling too much all at the same time and overclocking every brain cell. No, he bites, and nearly inwardly bristling at how cold yet strained his own voice sounded. Rude is yelling about someone talking under their breath when you were being louder than they were. The other boy's eyes narrow sharply at that as he takes a step back, and Izuku's mouth's already moving before his brain can have a chance to run interference. Tell me, Are people aiming to be heroes supposed to make a habit out of harassing people they don't even know? The boy looks alarmed at that, and Izuku hates he's taking some small satisfaction from it, that he's thinking good, be shocked, you deserve to feel embarrassed Kaken. Wait, that isn't right, Katsuki isn't here, he doesn't even know where he is. However, just like before, President Mick's voice cuts through the coming reply like a hot butter knife as a rather loud buzzer rang through the air. Hey there listeners. The cheerful MC's voice cried from the speakers stationed throughout the city. It's time to begin the second half of UA's entrance exam. Every stops whatever exercises or conversations they're in the middle of as they leapt to their feet, limber and ready for their second step in becoming heroes to begin. All the eyes on the confrontation turn to search the rooftops for the speakers, silently waiting with bated breath for further instructions. What, you waiting for a countdown? Mick's voice responded bluntly, ain't no starting call in a real battle kiddos, better get a move on, 'cause the test has already begun. With that they realize the second half was already underway, and everyone scrambles out into the city to regain their missed head start. The boy levels one last withering look at Izuku before speeding off ahead in a flurry of dust, leaving Izuku to stumble slowly behind to catch up, just like he always is. As Izuku expects, he's doing absolutely terribly. The robots are a lot bigger in person than they are on screen, and hit a lot harder than he predicts. The first one he runs into is a three-pointer, standing 4 times his height and armed to the teeth. He only barely gets near it before being immediately knocked off his feet when it strikes the ground to get at the one of the other examinee students. He barely recovers in time to see a pink-skinned girl with some sort of acid Quirk leaps out of nowhere and melt her hand through its head. That's 6 points now, she cheers, words glinting victoriously as she jumps off the down machine and runs off to find the next one. He and the rest don't even give themselves a moment to be stunned before running off to find another robot to fight. Lightning, fire, rocks, drill hands, spikes, gases, and every quirky element possible were flying through the air alongside broken machine parts as students rushed their metal foes and attempted to rack up points. Parts that barely benefit him, as none of the pieces are big or sharp enough to do him any good, and the ones that are end up too heavy for him to lift or carry for too long. What was the point of working out for 6 FNG months if I can't even lift a stupid piece of scrap metal? He cries as he hopelessly pulls at part of the halfway detached shell of a two-pointer, unable to even pry it away from its now lifeless host. He nearly loses his fingers when his grip falters, and eventually forces himself to move on. All around him students are effortlessly destroying robots with their quirks, and Izuku lets a twinge of childish envy sliver into his mind. Robots don't have minds to read or thoughts to pick apart. They're soulless wires and gears that act on pre-installed inputs that were near impossible to predict unless you were given enough time to observe their patterns. If he was facing off against people, if the test involved using his notebook, if his quirk actual went beyond simple things like mind reading. No, don't get distracted, focus on the exam and earning points. He dives through one of the alleyways in hopes of it getting him to the next block over quicker where the sounds of fighting are loudest. He does his best to push down the memory of cold slime running up his arms and legs as he runs through the narrowed, trash-covered path. President Mike calls the 10-minute mark only 3 minutes ago as Izuku slides into the empty downtown shopping district and runs into a one-pointer. Unlike the 2- and 3-pointers, this one was more closer to human size, though still reasonably big enough to require actual care and caution when confronting. Also unlike the others, Izuku is fully prepared and focused when he finds it rolling through the streets alone and unguarded, allowing him the perfect opportunity to strike it down and finally earn a point. Earlier, he found the broken arm of a two-pointer that was actually light enough to carry around as a club. He lets it follow him a few blocks, keeping enough distance to be grabbed yet still be close enough to make his move. He gets in close and gets it to follow him, waiting for them to be some distance away from the center streets before sliding under its windy arms, gripping the arm and tilting it towards its head. He's proud to have fallen back on some of the baseball skills he forced himself to pick up during his hobby hell. His foot slides out and his arm moves back in a sloppy arc, swinging out fast and against the side of its monitor. The club is made immediately useless once smashed against the head of its lesser point kin, breaking into shards of metal and wires. The attack is equally as useless, only serving to scratch off some of the paint and damage the large red lens acting as its eye, thus causing it to flail helplessly before tripping Izuku by sweeping under his feet. He desperately crawls away, eyes glued to the raised claw, slowly turning translucent green in his blurring sight. It doesn't even get a chance to strike before being blindsided by a boy with gleaming metal skin that comes out of the street corner screaming while Izuku wasn't looking. It happens all too fast in Izuku's panic-muddled thoughts. The robot was looming over him, bringing too many buried nightmares back to the surface they had been banished from, before a roaring battle cry comes out from behind and it slumps over before him. The silver-skinned boy stands proudly over his kill, pulling his fingers apart from the hammer strike he formed them to make. Someone's here. Don't look hurt. Should warn him. Careful, buddy, almost hit you there. He calls out, then darts off to the next street and disappears behind the grocery store. Izuku doesn't watch after him, drowning too deep in his self-made silence. He can still hear it, the noise of the ongoing battles and the robot's dying sparks, feel it dig its nails into his skin. So he grabs onto it and let it tug him back on solid ground before he falls too deep. Focuses on the now totaled one-pointer, at the large cracked dents in the metal the boy left in comparison to the small scratches and the cracked lens he himself had made. His brain is struggling to stop estimating the density of metal he's probably made of, to stop comparing the potential metal types of him and the one-pointer, yelling for him to stop and look at the small hairline fractures of the glass, at the barely visible dip in the metal ring holding it, at the small pieces of red only now flaking off onto the ground because that other boy's punch shook them loose. Look at it, Izuku. Look at what you did. Look at the damage you did. Look at his enemy you were so sure you could handle on your own, that you needed someone else to destroy for you. All that trouble, all that strength, all that practice and training and exercising and you didn't even break the goddamn lens. Izuku doesn't even notice he's thrown the remains of his impromptu weapon until he finally back on solid ground in time to hear the sound of the jewelry store's window breaking on impact. Time passes, and still Izuku has barely gained any points. Every time he found a robot, either another student swooped in to take out his target, or he was just too weak to actual face off against it and forced to flee. Now he's low on time and the amount of opponents has now dwindled to the point that everyone of the similar position is running around like spooked chickens, trying to desperately seek out a lone robot that hasn't been felled. At this point it probably wouldn't matter, but they're all desperate and they all realize their chances are slowly being slimmed. One point, he thinks as Mike calls out the 5-minute mark. I just need to find a robot and get 1 point. Just as he stops to consider going back around the marketing area, the ground begins to rumble, nearly knocking him off his feet and startling everyone else around him into halting and trying to discover the source of the tremors. They all turn to the far north of the streets, and out of the city horizon comes the zero-pointer. As like before, it's larger than it is in person, dim and near engulfing the entire skyline with its presence as it slowly drove through the city and over the buildings unlucky enough to be in its path. The sight of it alone is enough to make the wandering loiterers decide it's time to abandon any dreams of last-minute point collecting and book it to the furthest end of the city, with the following 2-minute call only serving to make them move even faster. Izuku breaks out of his shock just in time to notice almost everyone has left him in the dust, and he begins to turn to join the other fleeing examinees until a distressed sound coming from ahead makes him pause once more. One of the students, a blonde boy in a black t-shirt, was limping around in a daze behind everyone else, with not a single person passing by stopping to help or get him to start running. While too far away to read his thoughts, they're glowing as sluggishly as the boy's moving, and he's seemingly paying no attention to his surroundings, including the slowly but surely approaching zero-pointer that's mercilessly crushing a street lamp underfoot with little effort. His eyes scope out the area again, conflicted and terrified. There's no one nearby that he can ask for help from, and he doubts he could take the robot on himself, even if his quirk were more battle-oriented. The robot's getting closer and the boy is only now stopping to notice that the ground is moving wildly beneath him. He'll hate how stupid he was about this. Izuku doesn't even remember telling himself to stop, that logically speaking, UA isn't negligent or reckless enough to let a robot crush a potential student, no matter how rigorous and dicey their entrance exams appear to be. He just ran forward and tackled the boy into the adjacent empty building, dust and darkness falling over them both as they went tumbling across the ground, and the giant treads smashed through the front half they were luckily not anywhere near. It was deafening and terrible, and all he could do was press both their heads down and pray as the building shook and the windows in front of them imploded on impact with the tremors. Izuku laid there for what felt like forever, covered in cement flakes and drywall dust and glass, and a cold, naked fear that hardened his limbs and kept him there shaking and crying as he flails against the weight that's dragging him down, down, down. You're fine, everything's fine, you're okay, you're not there, stop being pathetic, you're fine, stop it. It feels like it drags on for hours as he warbles his way back to reality, but it's only after a blink or two that he's back in the artificial city, and hears that fateful buzzer ring. It's only a week later that he finally gets the letter from UA. His mother nearly falls over herself to deliver the envelope, eyes and words bright with the same anticipation that Izuku was doing his best to keep fastened down as he took it to his room, promising to tell her the results before locking the door behind him. The inside is not a letter, but a thick metal disc and instructions explaining how to turn it on. He sets it on his desk, fiddles with a few buttons, and watch it blink to life. His hands clench at the sight of All Might appearing digitally from the display, dressed in a rather blinding yellow striped suit. Even though it was a hologram, the bitterness of the memory held fast. "Greetings, young Midoriya." He grins, waving nonchalantly at the boy he had only encountered months ago as if they were old friends. "I am here as a projection. I bet you're pretty shocked to see the number one hero speaking directly to you, and probably a little confused. You see, I'll be joining UA's faculty this year, so they put me in charge of delivering the news for incoming students." Izuku hums thoughtfully as All Might spoke on about how he was sorry for surprising him and that he needed to keep his new job under wraps, which was strange, because you'd think UA would be singing from the rooftops that they had the number one hero coming to their school as a teacher, especially since something like that was bound to increase their already high pedigree. Not to mention that something like that would, and should, be near impossible to keep a secret for too long. All Might had, likely, been in Mutsufu for months, yet not even the darkest deep web forums had spoken about it or given any hint they had a clue about any rumored sighting being related to a potential teaching job. In fact, no one seemed to even know he was here at all. While he was still spotted doing patrols and the like, no one really mentioned him frequenting the area enough to be suspicious or make note of it. It was like the man had vanished into the city's shadow, only choosing now to reappear and assure the world he was still alive. That is why the police told me they wanted to keep news about the slime Quirk user limited. He mumbles, spiraling so deep into insurmountable theories that he almost missed the hologrammed hero finally moving on to the real purpose of the message. But enough about that, let's go over your scores. On the written portion, you managed to score rather high, ranking 9 in the top 10 students for the section, an excellent job and a good show of intelligence. You definitely made an impression on the graders. Izuku blinked, staring blankly at the hologram as he tried digesting the information. He had been so stressed over his physical exam he hadn't even thought about how his paper exam was being graded. He mostly just wanted to get a high enough grade to make the cutoff and avoid losing his spot because of it. There had been so much emphasis on the second half more than the first anyway that it had practically slipped his mind. He hadn't known anything about UA ranking their test scores, let alone considered he'd get placed in the top 10 spot. Now, for the physical exam, he stiffens at the mention, ears perked and eyes widened. He had known how badly he had done during the second half, failing to destroy a single robot and getting himself trapped in one of the destroyed buildings near the end before he could even look for more robots to earn points from. They sat there for what seemed like forever after the buzzer, Izuku completely shell-shocked and the blonde boy with him mumbling nonsensically, his words equally scrambled. Until a few students came by with Recovery Girl to help get them out of the damaged building. While Izuku didn't regret stopping to help the other boy, and even if he got the chance to redo it he'd probably do the same thing all over again, a small frustrated part of him still felt he could have still done something, grasp one remaining thread left over that could have earned him a chance to get his foot in the door. But the time had passed, and now he was about to receive judgment for his actions. While it's true you didn't earn any villain points at all during the entire exam, All Might bluntly states, causing the boy to unconsciously flinch. There were other things from the exam the screening panel was looking out for asides from raw strength. The projection of All Might phases out, changing into an overhead video of the testing grounds, and right in the corner was Izuku, looking like a goddamn lunatic as he ran towards the blonde boy whom he ended up tackling into the building. You see, All Might begins as his image returns, tone remaining surprisingly upbeat. There is another set of scoring criteria used alongside the villain bots, completely unknown to the students, known as rescue points. Part of a hero's job is to help those in need and bravely risking their lives for others, and we look for that same sort of valiant altruism in our students, awarding them additional points for assisting fellow examinees and rescuing those in peril. The hero's projects pauses for dramatic effect, rubbing the bridge of his nose and humming approvingly. You yourself showcased such attitude in saving this young man from the zero-pointer with your quick thinking, though it seems he doesn't really remember you assisting him. In any case, you earned about 5 rescue points for that amazing show of bravery. He leans back, breathing stilled and eyes watering slightly. Something warm and bright blooms in his chest and begins to spread. This whole week he had despaired over failing to score anything during the exam, angry at himself, at the circumstances. Feeling he had wasted his one chance at showing his childhood dream was more than silly, childish talk. But now he learns he was unknowing given another chance to prove himself, and succeeded. He earned points, he had gotten noticed, he had helped that boy. Despite how ridiculously close to death he had almost put the both of them anyway. His stupid, reckless stunt had meant something. Unfortunately, All Might cuts in somberly, stomping down the blooming joy with his next words. Amazing as your actions were, it was not enough to qualify for our heroics course. In the end, your inability to defeat any of the test robots and the sole 5 point you earned did not meet the school's requirements. However, because of your excellent test grades and how well you did in the written exam. Izuku doesn't hear the rest of the message. Doesn't hear that he's getting dropped into general education because of his test scores. Doesn't hear about all the wonderful opportunities the section will provide himself. Doesn't hear how he did his best, that he showed promise, and that it was such a shame he hadn't made the cut. Doesn't hear All Might, smile disgustingly melancholic and kind, whisper lowly, I'm sorry, young Midoriya. You'll receive your uniform come next January, along with your class assignment. The hero finishes, giving a farewell salute. Congratulations, young Midoriya, and welcome to UA. The disc beeps twice and shuts off. Izuku picks it up and rises from his chair, staring at the device like All Might will pop up again and tell him it was a joke, that he is going to be part of UA's heroics department, that he didn't waste an entire week stressing and panicking, having nightmares about never being found, buried under rubble and his heavy cold fear, or of not making it in time and watching that boy crush like a grape, only for himself to be flattened next with no one coming to his aid either, just to be told he had lost before he even tried. That he didn't hand him his one small hope just to see them crush it to dust while he sat watching it fall apart. All Might stands before him near the mouth of the tunnel, grin strained as he quickly spewed out false hope to a desperate child that neither believed. He almost throws the projector in his frustration and grief, desperate to see it, the All Might hologram, and its horrible message all smash into a million little pieces that would never come back together. I'm sorry, Izuku young Midoriya. But instead he collapses to the ground, heart-shattering at the realization that all those months of hard work and training and suppressing have been for nothing. It's not fair. He whimpers on the floor, curling into himself and clenching the device so tightly he was certain it was cracking under his grip. It's not fair. All across Japan, various children clung to their parents in despair and disappointment, drowned in bitter tears of misery as their dreams died with nothing more than an apology and a golden smile. It's not fair. Inko silently shakes as she looks at the scene in her living room. Izuku is sitting in the living room, reading over a rather thick-looking book. Inko can only see part of the title, something about Quirk sequences, while curled up on the couch. Normally, such a sight wouldn't be concerning. She has rather fond memories of Izuku doing similar when he was younger, eagerly going through the books in the house and coming up to her or Hisashi when he had trouble reading a word or needing help reaching one from the higher shelves. None of the books around him are ones they own, and they're all vastly different subjects: sewing, fencing, geology, music history, magicians, chemistry, quirk biology, biographies, autobiographies, historical records, encyclopedias, movie analysis, too many to even count. If she didn't know better, she'd have thought her son had cleaned out an entire library of its stock. Izuku. She calls softly, and Izuku's head snaps up, eyes settling from their sudden panic to an obviously practiced neutrality. It's be reassuring, make her believe she was imagining it all, if he wasn't still flipping through the pages while his eyes were on her. Oh, do you need something? She knows the answer, but asks the question anyways. Are you studying for something? He flips to the next page unseeingly. No. Oh, is all she can manage to say, and Izuku returns his attention to the book in front of him. She's certain he doesn't notice or care that he'd lost his place already. Ask him, she hisses at herself, something's wrong. This isn't right, this isn't normal. He's hiding something, you need to ask him what's wrong. She tries to ask again to get his attention, but her throat becomes paralyzed, trembles at the idea. He's staring at her, heartbroken, like the entire world is falling apart and she has no clue how to put it back together for him. I can't do this, I'm sorry. You have to. But some frustrated and hopeful part of her threw itself forward and pushed the real question locked in her heart to center stage. Then why? Izuku freezes, nearly drops the book in seems like shock, but is far too deep and desperate to be close to it. She'll never forget it, that frightened, lost look her son gave her before finally answering her. I just wanted to give myself something to keep busy. Inko Midoriya falls asleep to the memory of sitting across from her son's bedroom door, listening mournfully as his desperate wails echo through the halls. She rushes to get in, to save her baby from his despair. She reaches for the handle. I hate you. But the door vanishes the moment she reaches for it, and she wakes in tears, grasping at the empty air. Izuku wakes up from a dream of sad doubting eyes and being forgotten under a tomb of cement and broken metal, silently reaching out for help that never comes. He ends up owing the library 2,680 yen for not returning the books he borrowed back in time.